Okay. I think I clicked all the buttons correctly. I think we're live. Okay, I'm pretty sure. Welcome everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And gang, we have a show for you today. Recently, Trump has made some comments on NATO. Um, with varied receptions, let's say. Conservatives in general seem to look askance at NATO as an institution and organization. Some leftists also do as well. And I thought it would behoove us to go through and talk about what NATO is, whether or not it still serves a purpose, whether or not it's currently serving that purpose, whether or not America should be part of any kind of thing like this as well, and interventionism in general. Um, Broad topic, lots of cool guests, and I'm going to give them a chance to shout themselves out and tell people what they think. And we're going to start with my boy Rashad. Go ahead.
My name is Rashad Crenshaw, and my take for today is that I believe NATO is the most important alliance in human history. I think it's incredibly beneficial to the West's economic security, national security, and for the benefit of the world in general. So I believe currently that the United States of America has no reason to pull out of NATO. That GDP expenditures can be negotiated without, wild activities such as derailing NATO or leaving NATO. So that's how I'll start.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to have you. Next up, another uh, longtime friend of the show, someone I appreciate, Admiral Gibbs. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you, Wick. Uh, I'm Admiral Gibbs. I'm a big fan of NATO in some capacity. However, we got a lot of problems here that need to be taken care of first, and a lot of these countries aren't paying their fair share. So I think we can get into all the details of that here in a bit. But that's kind of my opening thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm sure we will get into the nitty gritty as we go. Thank you again for being here, and we'll see how it goes. Next up, Tyler, please.
At the risk of sounding redundant, I'm not 100% completely against NATO. The idea of it, I like more than the current inception that we have. Um, and I kind of more came in the defense of Trump's comments. I don't think he also wants to leave NATO, or he might have actually done that. So I'm going to be arguing for what I think NATO should be doing in the future if it continues to move forward.
And just for my audience's edification, and again briefly, can you tell us what those comments were that Trump made?
Oh, I don't have the quotes pulled up directly in front of me, but he vaguely said that he was speaking with the leader of one of the large power countries when he was president. And he said, if you don't start paying your fair share, we're going to let Russia do whatever they want to you. And apparently they paid up and he was bragging about it. He calls himself the savior of NATO.
Okay, well, we'll see how that goes as we get into it. Thank you for being here, Tyler. I always appreciate you and the level of research you bring to these things. Last but certainly not least, first time guest on my show, Shockway. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, I think my stance is basically going to be that NATO has had somewhat of a skeptical past, but I think they're still necessary, especially considering a threat from Russia. I think if you want to decrease the funding from the U.S. into NATO, that's not necessarily a bad idea, but I think you should do that slowly and definitely not suddenly. In a post world where Russia isn't a problem, I think NATO could focus on some other things that we can get into. And then Trump's comments just feel kind of weird to me because he seems like a guy who would rather keep the funding towards NATO as much as possible in terms of the U.S. input because he would want to be able to control the situation more. So that was kind of my thoughts on what Trump said.
Okay, and with that, I guess I'll start off this way. Uh, do we think that NATO currently in its inception is effective? And what does that even mean? Go ahead. It's open to the floor.
I'll take it. Sorry. If you want to go, dog.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'll say that NATO has been incredibly effective. I think that we could be even more effective, but I think the failure of Russia and Ukraine to win They're facing Ukraine, which is currently funded and backed by NATO, and they can't even beat the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians don't hold a candle to the average NATO military, the big members, the UK, France, the United States. And yet Russia's struggling with us just simply sending Ukraine funding, sending them intel, sending them supplies. So clearly, even though NATO definitely could be doing better, we could be more cohesive. We could be, nations could be paying that 2% of their GDP that they're supposed to be paying. It's undeniable with what we've seen today that what we prepared for in a Russian invasion of a friendly nation or a NATO ally, we have been clearly prepared for that, and we've done a great job. So I'd say that currently we're doing a good job.
I'd argue if you look at the from 1992 on the missions for NATO, what they've been doing is mostly naval blockades, no-fly zones, battling piracy, peacekeeping missions, and training troops in Afghanistan, things of that nature. One of the earliest no-fly zones they did in Bosnia got a lot of scrutiny because there were over 500 violations in just I think it's 1 month or within a year, and it was a mockery. People were just ignoring them because they had no teeth to them. So they've gotten a little more teeth to them still, but I would argue that I'd want NATO to function more like the world's FBI, how the FBI functions in the United States between state to state. I want to give them more power of policing because I kind of feel like they're ineffective and their goal in the last 15 years has just been like do whatever the US is doing and back them up.
I want to.
Just I have a question on that. When you say give them more teeth to do more policing, can you elaborate? And before you do, $5 from 𝕍𝖎 to ask this. Minus weapons and intelligence, what are these NATO costs that US is excessively paying into?
I would have to look into the breakdown of the costs. See, I didn't know what way
I
we were
mean,
gonna.
there's no like NATO fund. We all agree to pay a specific amount of our GDPs toward defense.
Well,
But there's
what's
no
interesting,
like piggy bank.
but what's interesting about that? Only 35% of the countries, I think it's 12 of the total countries, are reaching the 2% goal. Right. So a lot of these countries aren't paying their fair share. Right. Like that's not even really a debate. Right. Okay. And so we could argue what like we can get down in the nitty gritty and talk about what it is. I think a lot of it is bureaucratic. Like they have a lot of funding, and then there's probably logistics is probably a big part of the funding. But I also want to talk about when y'all talk about effectiveness. It's hard to be effective in the current state of NATO. I think. I'm gonna like let a debate enjoyer. He'll probably go give you more of the specifics with the statistics on the fly zones and whatnot. But I want to talk big picture politically. First, look at countries like Turkey. Turkey really is an interesting case when I look at NATO. Right, they prevented countries like some of the Finnish countries up there where they wanted to fight Russia from getting in or slowed their process of getting in quite a bit. While they seem to simultaneously, with the other hand, doing deals with Russia, and they like were talking about buying weaponry from Russia, and that was real controversial. And just thinking about like we don't necessarily want this. This seems like just a disaster waiting to happen, where they're going to be able to get intelligence from a sympathetic country like Turkey, who's already worked against us in several different cases in Syria. So and we can't seem to get a broad policy on some of these other issues, and I think that's going to be a real concern going forward in the future for our overall effectiveness as NATO as a thing. So I think that's something we need to take into consideration as well.
I think a big part of this too is going to be for the U.S. to, as much as they possibly can, get away from any kind of Russian dependency. I know that was kind of a previous issue in terms of like oil supplies. I think if you can get away from being dependent on Russia
Are you
and put them in a
talking NATO
position,
or are you talking the US?
I guess more specifically the U.S. My thought process was if the U.S. kind of gets out of that situation, they would have a little more. I don't know how to put this, but I guess a little more sway in what like Russia's ability to even invade. And then at that point, you could start talking about like, okay, if Russia doesn't even have the capability to invade, then we can get away from having the U.S. be such an excessive funder of NATO in general. But I think as long as like Russia is a threat, I don't see a world in which the U.S. is not going to be like is just going to say like, okay, everybody automatically has to be a 2% or we're not going to fund it all. Like I just feel like that would have like catastrophic consequences.
Okay. I still am curious, right? When Tyler says that he wants NATO to have more teeth and to police more. Again, are you talking about within? Are you talking about more interventionism, right? Because you
Yeah.
mentioned blockades and stuff like that, right? Can you give us an example of today what that would look like?
I would say that maybe even they take some of the jobs of Interpol. I kind of want them to move into a role like the FBI would take, where if there's conflict between nations, and not like crimes like Interpol, but like wartime conflicts, that they have more of an authority to command. Um, I'm not exactly 100% sure what that would look like, because we have economic sanctions, and economic sanctions work to hurt the economy, but they really very rarely deter a country from going down the road they want to go down. So it would have to be some sort of military interventionism. But
I
there's
disagree.
also yeah, I mean, well, hold on, let me. There's also the aspect of growing NATO. I feel like if we took NATO and focused less upon Russia and more upon what George Bush classified as the axis of evil, we took in Iran, China, and all these other countries that are banded under this banner into consideration. Started taking in countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, people from the Middle East, Israel would definitely join as well. We could expand the power of our sanctions as well. So maybe they would be more effective. But what do you disagree with me on? I'm sorry.
I don't think we should be more direct. I think we found a really perfect Goldilocks area where we don't have to worry about, prompting Russia to push that red button because, as we know, Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, he loves to threaten everybody with blowing everybody up. I mean, every month is a new threat to blow everyone up. I think Russia has proven that they're an irrational actor on the global stage. And I think that our hands off, but simultaneously behind the scenes, hands on approach of aiding behind the scenes and sending funding and weaponry and intel has given us the ability to mitigate Russian strength, Russian aggression, and to impose our will on geopolitical stage without risking a massive global or just regional war. So I think NATO, as it operates right now, is pretty good. But I would agree that expanding NATO to other nations, in the context of the different enemies we have around the world, is definitely a good idea because it would allow us to have a bigger impact on the decisions we want to make. But that's where my agreement is with you.
But see, the thing is, like, then we go into the money trap problem, because, like, a lot of Ukraine, I mean, I get the GDP argument. These countries are a lot smaller GDP. They have a lot less money to throw around. But all NATO is serving right now as a purpose is like, we got your back, United States, and it's like most of the United States money that we're like filtering through 8 middlemen and then respending on the United States mission in the first place. So why not just let the United States do it if that's the case? I feel like that we need more power to NATO to justify its existence as anything besides just an alliance. We could still do the alliance part, and then all the world policing we could cut off, and that would the yearly funding part would go away to a large degree.
I want to build somewhat of a middle ground here, I think, on my stance with. So I agree. I think NATO does need more teeth, and I would like them to see more, do more quote unquote policing or interventionist
Give
whatnot
us
kind
a,
of things.
you guys keep saying like the
I'm
problem
about to. I'm
just
about
real
to.
quick,
Joe.
just real quick, if I may. The problem I'm having is we're speaking so broad, so general, so kind of conceptually that it's hard for me at least to kind of envision what you mean when you say I want to see NATO do more interventionism. Can you, Admiral Gibbs, give me a specific example in the world today where you would say NATO should intervene militarily? NATO
Yeah.
troops, material, whatever, right, should go in and intervene. What's that look like?
Right.
Go ahead.
I'll give you two examples. Right. So the United States has been doing. First, I'll do probably the more like freedom of like the sea. Right. Freedom of trade on the sea. Right. We run ships through. Right now, we're having issues with the Houthis. I would like to see less of the U.S. At playing that role as the guardian, and more of NATO stepping up and taking over like a policing duty and coming in and saying, okay, we have to bomb the Houthis. They're attacking shipping. Or like say China with the South Taiwan Sea. Now I guess this would be harder since it's the North American, North Atlantic, right? Or maybe we need an equivalent in the Pacific, or something, but something along the lines of like if they were geographically capable of doing this, something like the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, where they would come in and they'd be like, no, this is international waters, or no, this is whatever. These islands are just undisputed land. This is like our land, or like, whatever country's land. Like now, I mean, that's not exactly applicable because they're like, in the Pacific. But if that were to be happening in their hemisphere, absolutely. Or well, like I said, the Houthis, I would absolutely love to see them step in and be much more interventionist, like do boots on the ground if they have to, stop the Houthis from destroying shipping. A lot like the French are doing in Africa, right? They're sitting here taking an interventionist role in many countries, fighting terrorist groups that they have deemed to be like a very big threat. Much more of that was more what I would want to see, and less of the U.S. if we're going to be funding them to the degree we are. Which is why are we funding them if we're going to keep funding them to do this, and they don't have the power to do these things? Then they're useless, right? So I like that's really the thing. But I don't know about all the policing, like Interpol stuff. I feel like we are, like somebody already said, we're in a Goldilocks. I feel like we are in a Goldilocks with NATO, but I wish they would use the power they have to do more of this, so the U.S. could like not have to do all the work all the
I
time.
think I think you're right, but again, it's they either have to have more teeth or we take away the enforcement mechanism in whole. If we give them more teeth, like Rwanda is an example I would like to go to. In Rwanda, the United States went in and did the bulk of the work, and NATO was there, but they were there as a peacekeeping force. And it began like in late October 1993. After the conflicts have already started and the United States is doing the bulk of the work, I would like to see NATO empowered to the point where they could take care of something like that, where a small government or a small army is causing a problem. I'd like to see NATO step in the Congo, where there's no oil or anything for the United
But
States
this,
to like, okay, there's
I
no
think
natural.
we're already there. I think we're already in that position.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
think
just like to
we're
see
NATO as it stands right now could handle. Let's just say we had a World War scenario. Let's say we had China, Russia, Iran. NATO as it stands is made up mostly of European members. If Russia were to pop, well, Russia has already popped off, but let's just say it got worse. They could handle Europe. We could handle the Pacific. We're already in a position right now where we can basically juggle a global conflict. In terms of enforcement, I don't think NATO should operate in an enforcement capacity. I think that we are a mutual defense treaty, and I think that nations who choose to aggress against members of that, mutual defense treaty will, of course, incur the wrath of the mutual defense treaty. However, in terms of becoming more aggressive, I think that's a bad idea. I think what we have right now is not only the strategic advantage, but we also have the moral advantage. We get to be able to say, hey, look, we didn't aggress on Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine, which is a empirical fact. We don't have to worry about, having the lack of moral advantage here. We get to claim both the moral and strategic advantage, and I think that we have covered both bases. I think we've been able to mitigate Russian aggression. I think that we could cover both Europe and the Pacific in the event of a war, and I think that the U.S. leading the charge of NATO is better because I don't personally want other regions of the world having as much say-so on what goes on in the world as we do.
if I may, let's talk about Ukraine for a moment, because Ukraine isn't a member of NATO, right?
Right.
It's not currently a member of NATO. So I guess the two questions I would have for you, gentlemen, one, should we accept Ukraine if they chose to become a member of NATO, even with Russia currently aggressing upon them, right? And with all the risks that's involved. And two, does NATO have any impact, or should NATO have the influence it does over conflicts that don't involve it? Why or why not? Go ahead.
I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, I was just going to say, in terms of Ukraine, I think, given how tense things are there right now, I don't know if it'd be a good idea to fast track that, but at some point, I think given just Russia's lack of desire, lack of care for international law, treating sovereign nations like they're actual sovereign nations, I think Ukraine joining NATO would ultimately be a good thing. Obviously, Russia's not going to be happy with that, so you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. And if you think there's like an imminent threat from Russia, obviously negotiate with that in mind. But I think it's pretty obvious that Russia's basically just going to do whatever the hell it wants if it can get away with it. So I think any kind of alliance, when you're a smaller country, being part of an alliance that can help prevent that, I think is a big deal.
I want to say absolutely not. We should not accept Ukraine into NATO. Like, even if Ukraine all out wins, we should not accept them. And I'm going to tell you why. This is going to sound kind of heartless when I say it, so just bear with me. Um, Sometimes it's better for stuff to happen over there than for it is over here. That's a tried and true like meme that people make all the time. But there is some truth in this, right? Ukraine right now is basically a proxy war for the U.S. and NATO, and a lot of times it's good to have like a war. Theoretically, you could lose or could win, and it's going to drag out and it's going to hurt Russia. I'm not a conservative here that thinks the Ukraine war has been bad for America. I think it's been great. We've sold them old tech. We've seen how weak Russia is. We've stalled them. We've hurt them. Right? They're hurting. They're like we've done it with very little intervention, like from our part. Right? We don't have to put boots on the ground. Now, like the thing about NATO is this is supposed to be a buffer. It's another buffer. That's what the U.S. should be using it as before they get to us. Right? So if they're going to come into NATO, that's going to instantly antagonize. Right? Why would we even want them in NATO when we're already getting all the benefits from them fighting the war for us without NATO having to be directly involved, right? We can sit here and have some sort of plausible deniability on the world stage. There's no reason to bring them in. And then, in addition to that, as for we mentioned talking about NATO earlier, well, I think it really depends on how we define aggression, right? Like, and I hate to be the guy to sit here and wants to do definition debate, but in this case, aggression can be a broad stroke of terms. I would say the way I'm defining is anything that threatens the status quo, which is America is the world superpower, right? And NATO is basically our client states, in my opinion. So if these people are mutually defense states, then yeah, we don't. I don't think we need Ukraine in there. We need our proxy wars some places, and absolutely not. We shouldn't accept them.
I think Ukraine being a part of NATO is an inevitability that's justified. I think that if we want to give Russia a second thought of invading, I mean, this is their second time coming to Ukraine. They invaded Ukraine and took Crimea. They're back again. It's abundantly clear that they're going to continuously play these games. If we want to mitigate another Russian invasion, we have to understand that the only thing they respect geopolitically is strength, and NATO provides strength. That Article 5 shit is real, and Russia understands that it's real. And the reason why they're playing games with Ukraine is because they know Ukraine doesn't have that luxury. So even if we can't take back Crimea, even if we can't take back the Donbass, it's incredibly important to at the least bring Ukraine into NATO. That will mitigate the most amount of aggression.
So, if I may, a question for you on that, Rashad. Do you not think that unnecessarily increases the risk of a more global conflict? That by bringing NATO in, or I'm sorry, excuse me, bringing Ukraine into NATO, especially while they're currently at war, would be seen as an act of aggression by Russia and China, India, etc., or not India, I'm sorry, Iran. Do you not think that unnecessarily will escalate things?
No, I think that they understand the fact that Russia has gotten themselves into a situation where I think I think they picked a massive field of oopsie daisies. And I think that all the other nations have seen that for exactly what it is. I think that right now Russia's paying an economic and military price that they didn't think they were going to pay. And it's important for all the other nations who might be thinking of doing exactly what Putin did to rethink that, because Putin and Russia have paid a significant price. It could piss off Russia, it could piss off BRICS, but at the end of the day, they've already played their hand. You've invaded Ukraine and it hasn't gone well for you. Why should we continue to accommodate you and give you more and more and more? Instead, we should make them pay. So if you want to invade Ukraine, we'll damage your economy, we'll damage your military. Oh, and by the way, your reason for doing it is now gone. Now Ukraine's a part of NATO. Finland's a part of NATO. I think Sweden's eventually going to join too. We don't make concessions to Russia. They've overplayed their hand. Now they have to start offering shit to us because things didn't go exactly the way they thought it was going to go. So in my opinion, we have the upper hand here.
Can I jump in there and offer you another theory on that? I also have answers to your questions as well, if you want. I also Shock is kind of getting skipped here. That being said,
I promise you, if he wants in, he can elbow his way in. He's a big boy.
No, yeah, I'll talk next. I have more of a question than a statement, so I'll go last.
All right. Well, first, I wanted to kind of address that point that he just brought up. I think Russia's original stated goal was to take over 2 more regions, so they had access to some sort of port. It's not my biggest political topic. I don't follow it day to day like I do other things. So, but I'm pretty sure they're currently holding the original goalposts that they set, and Ukraine has ceded up all that land. So, I think in Russia's mind, this was their last chance to gain access to those water ports, because joining NATO was inevitable. I think it was going to happen over time. Every generation comes, kind of forgets the promises of the past. It was going to happen, and they knew it, and they knew this was probably their last chance to get a little bit more territory out of Ukraine. So I think absolutely we should let them in. Russia should not dictate Ukrainian policy. Threats from Russia, too fucking bad. That's what NATO's there for. And
Yeah,
they're the exact best candidate to be in NATO.
I think the tough thing is going to be balancing that like the ethical side of like, look, Russia, you're obviously going to try to do whatever you want, with the fact that Russia, I feel like, is always going to be like, look, if you do this, we're going to fuck everything up. We're going to bomb everything. So it's like, at some point, you just have to, I don't want to say call their bluff, but at some point, you have to lay down a line and say, like, look, this is our moral stance. Like, we're not going to allow countries to just come in and invade whoever the fuck they want, whenever the fuck they want. Now, if there is like a credible threat to, like, look, Russia's got like an actual like missile right here and there's going to be problems, similar to what happened with Poland, which is, I believe, Obama abandoned the whole missile defense system in Poland. I think that, I forget what year that was. Like, if there's a credible threat, obviously you don't fucking do anything, no doubt. But if there isn't, like, you can't just let the bully keep being the bully. If the bully's like, hey, I'm going to knock you out, eventually you got to be like, okay, well, I'm still going to stand here, even with that threat.
I want to push back against a lot of this actually. So there is absolute. I just don't understand the logic of wanting to like y'all can say, oh, we think that Putin's gonna back off because the Article 5 or Article 4. I'm sorry, I'm the numbers are getting mixed up in my head today. But if y'all want to sit here and say he's not gonna push back, I don't know what evidence y'all have to say that he wouldn't do that. Like every time they said they were gonna be aggressive, they end up being aggressive, right? This is just like one more excuse to play into his narrative, right? If we put Ukraine in NATO, what has he been saying the whole time? They want Ukraine in NATO. Even before the war, part of the reason they were doing this was to like secure this stuff. You're playing into his hand, his narrative, and as someone mentioned earlier, the new axis of evil is basically Iran, China, North Korea, Russia, right? Like that's our new axis of evil, if we want to call it, right? They're the powers that are opposed us. They have significant sway over a large portion of the world's population with their own media influences and the messages they put out, right? We even have them swaying people here in America, right? We're sitting here seeing people say, oh, maybe we trust Putin more than the U.S. government. That's crazy. That's crazy to me, right? But, what do I know, right? And so if they're able to do that here, imagine what they're actually influencing worldwide. If we let Ukraine in, we're literally playing right into their hand. Secondly, right, it's crazy to me that we're just going to fund Ukraine like they're a member of NATO, maybe even more so than in NATO in some respects, and we're just going to keep funding them and funding them and funding them. Whenever, like, I want to talk about aggression, like we said earlier, we literally have aggression problems here at home, like with our own issues. We literally are having massive border issues all across the line, and they're going to slap and say, "Oh, we're going to give you 20 billion for that, 160 million to Ukraine," right? And then not even have problems in the bill to actually address the issues, right? This is disgusting to me when I look and see these kind of things in the moment when we want to write NATO a blank check. Like I'm the almost biggest probably neocon here, right? I'm all about using American power as influence to get what's best for America worldwide. Like I'm always pro using our military, right? I know this, right? So for me to sit here and say, "Oh, I'm against NATO and our clients," well, in some respects, yeah. I mean, when it's time to pay the bill and deal with the issues at home, sometimes you got to cut funding to stuff that you want to like you want to have funded. And I think in this case, people haven't been paying their fair share for a while, so it's time for NATO to step up and take the bill because they're a defense treaty. Ukraine, is the gateway into Europe. If you let them go, sure, but like I said, we shouldn't let them in NATO. We should just keep them layered.
I
I gotta
just
disagree with
the
this.
problem is like, what do you like? Where do you? For me, it's like, where does this stop though? Like, if let's say Russia just keeps saying this and they keep invading like sovereign countries, or they keep taking certain territories that aren't theirs. Like, at what point do you say like, okay, I know you're threatening us, but like, you can't just take over? Because it feels like what they're trying to do is they're either going to say they're going to take over with their like verbal threats or their physical threats. So at some point, you have to, I feel like, draw a line and say like, look, there's no intel that says that this is a physical threat. I don't know, and to be fair, I don't know the details of their capabilities right now. But I don't know how, like, where do you draw that line of like, this country is going to keep threatening us, which we don't want, but if we keep letting them do whatever they want because of the threats, they're just going to take over whatever they want.
Well, the line
Let
is
them do what
drawn
we
in the
want.
NATO contract, isn't it? Isn't it like if
Well,
we
that's
attack a NATO
right.
nation? Yeah, we go Article 5. Otherwise, we'll fund some proxy wars, but we're not.
I mean,
gonna
we don't
back
even have to
them.
go that far. If we stop them here, they've lost a significant amount of armored vehicles. They've taken so many hits to look at the naval losses they've taken. This is the prime time right now to make Russia all talk. I mean, they were before, but now is the time to defund them, to disarm them, instead of giving them more time to rearm, resupply, and come back at a later date and deal the same damage they dealt before. Now, to what you said about playing into Putin's narrative, I don't know if you watched that Tucker Carlson interview, but Tucker tried to get Putin to join in on the NATO's bullying us, NATO, they're assholes, NATO this, NATO that. Putin sidestepped that and gave us a whole Crusader Kings 3 dissertation about like 1,000 years ago about, you know, Icelandic, Nordic, and
I can't believe you
Slavic
could
kings.
sit through that.
I mean, he completely ignored the NATO thing. So Putin himself has completely abandoned the NATO argument. I mean, he spent 40 minutes dodging it. If you don't want to call that abandoning
listen, I'm going to grant you he did give us a dissertation on Russian history. I like arguing who's founded it. I'm not going to argue that. We had an hour and 15 minutes. You had an hour and 15 minutes of it. You're right. That absolutely happened. But he did address some of the NATO stuff, right? He talked about a lot of the mutual missile funding, and he talked about, you know, he said, hey, this is a line, and then the U.S. did these things, and then he said, okay, well, then this is the line. To some extent, not, and this is where people are going to come and get me. I know some of what he said does have a kernel of truth to it, right? It may not be totally factual, but I can definitely see
Can you give us one of those times?
So several times he's talked about you know, what was it? The mutual missile like defense plans, like we were building missile defense in Europe and several different times. And he mentioned how, okay, we were going to build one, and then instead of having a joint one, they built one. And he was like, okay, well, don't do this because it's going to cause us to do this, right? And then we did it again, and we backed off. I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but those are the ones Putin mentioned, you know, and then as opposed to like, you know, whatever. And then he's also given us clear indication that Ukraine's a red line for him, right? He said Ukraine, if they join NATO, is a red line. You know, this is a whole thing. We're gonna what were there some of the propaganda pieces at the beginning? We're gonna denazify Ukraine or some bullshit, and then you know we're trying to stop NATO influence because they want Ukraine to be part of NATO. It's NATO aggression. And then now, if we do that, we're literally playing right into his hand, right?
Well, isn't this all the more reason to play into his hands, so to speak? Look at all the bullshit reasons he made up. Denazify Ukraine. If I recall correctly, Wagner Group is named after Hitler's favorite composer. Wagner Group was led by 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, a guy with Waffen SS symbols on his fucking collarbones. I mean, Vladimir Putin literally hired Nazis and then told the entire world, I'm going to end the lives of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to denazify Ukraine. Then Vlad went on to talk about, you know, there was an agreement that Ukraine would always be, you know, neutral and never join NATO. That isn't even real. There was no legal binding document there. I mean, time and time again, you look at Dmitry Medvedev threatening to blow us up every single month. Literally, Russia is an irrational state that's willing to destabilize Europe and damage the world economy for the most ridiculous of reasons. I personally believe that, you know, regardless of whether it plays into Putin's narrative or not, we need to shut Russia down once and for all. They've got to be done away with in terms of their capability to affect the global economy, to affect the NATO international security. This is the line. Ukraine is the line. Putin overplayed his hand. He thought the war was going to last 2 weeks. It's been 2 years. We have them exactly where we want them. We have them exactly where we want them. Now is the time to keep it up, to keep sending funding to Ukraine, to keep up the supply. You mentioned the fact that we had problems here at home. I mean, the funding that goes to Ukraine is about 1%, if not less than 1% of our GDP. We could easily fund plenty of other issues. The problem is House Republicans have been derailing the border bill, have been derailing every single piece of legislation Joe Biden has been offering them. I mean, Joe Biden literally offered to shut down the border, which I doubt he really wanted to do.
Let's not dig into
The bill was offered.
Biden was so desperate. We'll get into it though. But go ahead, Rashad.
Biden was so desperate for funding for not only Israel, but also Ukraine. He was so desperate, he was willing to, you know what, I'll shut down the entire fucking border to give you guys, he was willing to spend more on the border than Obama did. He was putting more funding toward than Obama did. Biden was willing to make so many concessions and changes in order to secure the border, and House Republicans decided to derail that entire thing. So when we sit here and talk about, well, what about the problems we have here at home? When have Republicans ever wanted to fund healthcare? Medicare? When have they ever wanted to take care of the poor, the needy in this country? But now all of a sudden, because Vlad is having a tough time in his little campaign in Ukraine, we need to cut funding to Ukraine. I just think it's kind of unfair.
We gotta get the time. We gotta get the time to Tyler, and then we're gonna go with Tyler, then Gibbs, and then we'll get Shock in there. Tyler, Gibbs.
That was a partisanship when the House
we just talked for like 20 minutes, dude. Relax. You're filibustering with toxic partisanship. Nobody here is playing them. Red
Did these events not happen, or are you just on a different
planet?
What are you talking about?
We're talking about NATO. not the Republicans.
This doesn't relate to
turning down a
NATO, the
border
funding
deal
for
they didn't
Ukraine?
like. Yes, we're talking about NATO, not Republicans turning down a border deal they didn't like. So anyway, Wick, we
You
were
got it,
on
broski.
Wick's
You got
first
it.
question, but I
Wait,
wanted to
does
kind of
hold on,
respond to.
hold on. Does Gibbs want to respond to Rashad? Because
I wanna
I know.
Okay, yeah, go in there and then I'll respond.
I do want to give
Yeah,
someone a
let's go.
chance to engage with this.
That bill was the most disgusting, insulting piece of crap bill. It was literally designed to, like, with Joe Biden in mind, like whipping out his dick and pissing on us in the desert and saying, "Do you like your water?" That's the equivalent of what that border bill was. And then to sit here and fund $60 billion to Ukraine on the same bill was just, let me just and slap all the people down here actually dealing with this shit in the face. That bill didn't address any of the issues. We're averaging over 100,000 people coming through a month just in here along Texas, right? More than that most months, right? And the bill was going to give us 55,000 new beds. It was going to provide like a measly, paltry 2 to 3 billion in actual border wall security, which is like, and you know, this is related to NATO because we're having a large influx of Chinese and Russian immigrants coming through now. Like we're having countries from further and further away coming through the border. These are really, I know people are going to meme and say Republican talking points, but I can literally go 500 feet from my house and I have a migrant camp under the overpass. 500 feet. Like, this is something we're dealing with wildly down here. And people are just like, oh yeah, this bill was going to solve the problems. It's going to help them, you know, go into all these things with the enforcement. No, and then we're going to offer 60 billion to Ukraine at the same time, and just when we've already given them 113 billion, and we can't even sit here and do anything about this literal invasion down here. Give me a break.
Not the literal invasion.
It is a literal invasion by
It's not
every
the literal
definition
invasion.
of
The literal invasion is going on in Ukraine. That's the literal invasion. What are we talking about?
But we literally have a fentanyl crisis coming through the bottom of the border, killing Americans.
We're trying to tell you though, we can walk and chew gum at the same time though. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. It's possible.
But we're not walking and chewing gum at the same time.
Well, you want the reason? Okay, you know what? Well, Broski over there was mad because I pointed the finger at the people responsible for why we're not walking and chewing gum at the same time.
And it was a slap.
But I'm more than happy to bring it right back. The MAGA folk is the reason why we can't get shit done. Now, if we could please all be on the same fucking team, we could solve both the border problem and the Ukraine problem. We could do both at the same time because the funding for NATO, the funding for our GDP, the funding toward our defense is 3%. The funding toward Ukraine is 1%. We're not losing a whole bunch of money because of what's going on in Ukraine. We can handle both problems. It's very possible.
It's not the Republicans' responsibility to clean up Biden's border mess.
What the fuck are you talking about? The man literally
was
shut
fine.
down the border.
You gotta let Tyler go. Tyler, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
So 2018, 2019, the border was fine. This is pre-Title 42. Title 42 was emergency executive power during COVID. Title 42 went away. Stay in Mexico was gone, completely returning the incentive to cheat the asylum system. Joe Biden makes up a potentially illegal visa program, and we have 1.8 million gotaways in the United States. That's potentially 6 up to 8 estimated potentially illegal people here since Joe Biden took office. What he was proposing was half-assed measures that ignored the House. If you ignore Mike Johnson's demand, you can't expect Mike Johnson to vote for your bill. All they had to do was bring the House into negotiation. They didn't. It was meant to buy. And then the Democrats that same day voted 100% against funding for Israel. So, like, if you want to play the political game with it, you can, but you just have to turn around and have to say, like, Democrats don't support Israel if you're going to use the exact same logic. They're playing politics to get a better bite of the apple. If they wait for Donald Trump to get into office, they get a better negotiating platform to argue their actual border law.
On this note, however, right, there is, or at least seems to me to be, a partisan divide when it comes to NATO in general as well. Trump, as well as many Republicans, have expressed dismay at NATO. Some even going so far as to call to withdraw or dismantle NATO.
I mean, what I think that is, Wick, is really a lot of Republicans. There's two kind of schools of thought, maybe a few more, but two in the Republican Party that I'm really aware of. One is the we need out, right? And I think that's a much vocal but smaller like segment, right? The rest of them is kind of where I'm at. I feel like, and I can't speak for all Republicans, but it's that like we see the good of NATO to an extent, right? But it's pretty clear to us that there's not being its fair share paid, right? And we're overdoing the burden. We have to lead every time. The NATO countries, they contribute such a small percentage when we go get involved in something, right? Every single time this happens, and we're just like, I think it's like they're fed up, and you were looking at the NATO thing as like a causal thing when it's really a symptom of the real issue, which is that I think Republicans across the board are just they feel like not only are they not being listened to because the other side's not in power, but it's also like things are being done in spite, like literally just for pure spite. Like this border bill, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, feels like it was a spiteful act. Then it was turned right around and they put forward another bill almost immediately that just didn't have any border or anything. That just seems petty, and it's very clear to a large portion. It's like, okay, well, listen, if you're gonna cut funding from this toy thing, then we're gonna cut funding from your favorite toy, which we're really not getting any benefits from anyway. And it's because it's like it's just business as usual. It's Washington D.C. negotiating, but it's also like there's some basis. How do we have the money to fund NATO when we can't even take care of our problems here when we're literally being invaded?
I want to toss the ball to Shock, give him some space there. But then Rashad, I could see it, and I know you want to respond to some of this. We're gonna go Shock, then Rashad.
Yeah, no, I don't have a ton to say about this in terms of like the border side of it, and I feel like we'd have to get really deep into it. In terms of Trump's comments on it, though, one thing I didn't say in the intro is part of me thinks that he's just being so anti-NATO as a way to set it up if he ever has like debates with Biden. Lord knows if that's going to happen. But I think the strategy there, just rhetorically, is to say like, look, don't pass this bill because we can enhance the talk about Biden wanting to fund NATO, but not doing anything on the border. And so I think part of it is he's kind of purposely obstructing this. That way he can go on the campaign, go in debates and say, hey, look, your president doesn't care about the border and instead cares about Ukraine. Now, the accuracy of that or not, I mean, I'm not entirely, I would say, educated enough on it. But I think just from a rhetorical standpoint, I think that might be what Trump is going for, is just to have something to fight against Biden, especially because the border is typically like a strong talking point for conservatives. So I think he's really going to try to harp on that.
Rashad, ball's yours.
I mean, Joe Biden has offered a funding bill that included 1,300 Border Patrol agents, 375 immigration judges, 1,600 asylum officers, and over 100 cutting-edge inspection machines to help detect and stop fentanyl at our southwest border. So, I mean, we can sit here and clap it up and laugh out loud about Joe Biden, but this man offered apparently up to $26 billion in funding for the border. It's not like this man isn't making an attempt to give y'all what y'all want. The man even offered to shut down the entire border. So it's not like this man's not offering to give y'all what you want and more. What's clear to me is that it's possible for America to chew gum and walk at the same time. And Joe Biden, at this stage in the game, that's hilarious, is offering to do just that. So it's like, my problem is that clearly we're spending 1% of our GDP on Ukraine. So it's a nothing expense. And we can clearly solve the problem at the border. So I think that the argument that we have problems at home, therefore NATO, I think that argument is clearly based on the numbers. Bunk. It's a waste of time. So are there any new arguments that we'd like to present for why NATO is a waste of our time currently?
Well, can I just say something in support of what you actually just said? The inspection of the personal vehicles. So currently, right now, about 2% of the personal vehicles are being inspected, and only 14% of the trailer trucks. And
are we talking at the border inspect? Okay, fair enough.
Just real quick. And the proposed technologies from Biden would increase the non-intrusive inspections, would allow up to 70% of the trailer trucks to be inspected, and move the 2% of personal vehicles up to 40%.
There is some good in that border bill. There is some good in it. It would somewhat cut down on asylum abuse. It wouldn't fix it, but there is some good in that bill. It just is not what Republicans want. They didn't negotiate it all with the House. Republicans want different things. Even if they would solve the problem, it's not. They did not work with House Republicans. House Republicans are pissed off about that. That's how politics works. When there was under Trump, there was a bill that he proposed that would get amnesty to 1.5 million Dreamers in exchange for changing chain migration to merit-based, getting rid of the family clause, and the border wall funding. And then later iterations of that bill, it got to just border wall funding and about 2.4 million dreamers just for border wall funding. And Democrats voted it down. And nobody said at the time Democrats don't care about dreamers. It would have given amnesty to 2.4 million again. Nobody bashed the Democrats as being not for the causes that they say are obstructing government. They understood that they didn't want the wall. You know, like this is just a policy disagreement. And it's pretty normal in politics. I don't the emphasis on it that like Republicans are uniquely bad for doing what both sides do all the time with all sorts of. Now I agree, Mike Johnson probably should have took it into an amendment process, proposed his version of the bill, and not just said dead in the wall. I agree, probably should have done a little more and offered an alternative, but for them to just turn down the bill, that's normal. Like most House bills go to the Senate and die, and vice versa. Like this happens all the time.
Uh, and also, it didn't even really address the real problem. Like I've said many times that like it's all good if we get the administrative side taken care of. In fact, I even said we need immigration reform. We need to make it easier for people that want to work to come here and work here and be part of the American dream. I'm all for all of that. Let me tell you, right? I'm a big fan. But whenever we don't, when we literally have wave after wave after wave of people coming through on a daily basis in the thousands. I mean, like Eagle Pass, for example, is a town of like 40,000 people, 40 to 70,000 people, I believe, right? And they're sheltering a massive camp basically of twice the size of the town. Like if we just don't have the infrastructure, and if we don't build something to stop this, whether that's a wall or a hybrid wall or like surveillance system or something, then the bill's not serious. It wasn't a serious bill, and so the reason why this relates back to the Ukraine is because the Dems had the audacity to include it with the Ukraine bill when the Ukraine has already got 113 billion dollars. I mean, and now they
That
want to
was
get
the
60
GOP.
billion more. I mean, it's just sure. Yeah, because the GOP was just hoping for something just to get the topic talk going. It's total bullshit, is what it is. That we can just fund Ukraine indefinitely, and we can't help our border. I just
I
don't understand
think
why.
I think that offering to shut down the border, sure, it's not the perfect plan that Republicans wanted, and I acknowledge that. But being willing to shut down the border is a massive concession. Can you guys admit that on some level, that being willing
Absolutely.
to shut down? So what I'm saying is this: NATO, in terms of funding, is not that, like, in terms of putting off 3% of our GDP towards defense, chump change. It's nothing. Stopping Russia from the damaging, global commerce and destabilizing peace in the world, it's a nothing price. What I'm trying to say is I firmly believe that we have problems at home, therefore NATO and foreign aid bad, or NATO and foreign aid not good right now. I think that argument isn't all that great when we look at how much Biden was willing to give up. So what I'm saying is that currently, if we can make incremental changes at the border, while simultaneously sending money to Ukraine, that's our best bet right now. Because frankly, I don't want Russia to gain more land. I don't want them to gain more ground. Right now, the utmost importance, and I think that global issues will always cost more than the border. I don't see how the border could cost as much as Ukraine. I mean, they're not shooting HIMARS and rockets, and like it's just not gonna. It's never gonna be as expensive. So I personally think we're right where we need to be if Republicans would have accepted that shutdown border deal.
So real quick to that shutdown point. So the policy itself says that it gives the president the power to shut down at 5,000, but it doesn't actually instantiate any powers. So Republicans are claiming because it sets that limit, all this does is take a power the president already has. Takes a power the president already has and now puts a congressional limit on it, making it weaker. And then it also puts a clause in the bill that limits the president's use up to 2 years, and then the power has to be renewed. So Democrats are kind of putting a power in place that would only be in effect under a Biden, and then removing that power when the next president comes in.
Okay, I I understand that, and if you want to respond to that, that's okay. But after you respond to that, I do want to drag it back a little bit towards the NATO side.
I want to
Yeah,
answer your
let's look at
second
that.
question still.
Oh, do you have an answer to?
Oh no, I
question?
said I'm cool with bringing it back. That's fine. We can bring it back.
Your second question was NATO does it have the authority? And like it's the same reason. Like, does America have the authority to go and help other nations that we're not directly allied with? It's yes, authority is what we say it is, and under Pax Americana, we've like created this free trade globalized network that's made prices come down for the consumer in ways that no other time in the world has this ever happened. So we definitely need an enforcement mechanism behind it. NATO's just that. They're already battling piracy and things like that. Absolutely, we should have them there.
Why NATO and not the UN?
Mm,
We're
hmm.
talking about a global alliance. If Tyler, if what you're talking about is a global alliance to protect free trade and shipping lanes and etc., right? Obviously, sea lanes, travel routes, all these things extend far beyond NATO itself, right? And thus, I guess my question would be, why not? If that's what you're concerned about protecting, why not give teeth to UN instead?
See, dude, that's the thing is like I think we need to expand the powers of NATO because I'm having a hard time justifying their current inception. We need to give them more power because like, why not? Like Rashad was saying, he's cool with NATO basically backing the United States up earlier, but like, why even give NATO money then? Why not just do the coalition government thing? Let the U.S. keep their money,
When you
not
say
let
give
five
NATO
middlemen
money, what do you mean?
like the NATO alliance. NATO was backing us up in Afghanistan. They were doing combat missions. They were doing peacekeeping missions. They were helping train soldiers in Afghanistan and such. Like they basically had our back, and like they were doing things in Turkey. They like for a while they haven't been North Atlantic Treaty involved. They've been in the Middle East helping basically the U.S. mission in the Middle East.
That's because we
So
summoned them.
yeah, exactly. But what justifies their existence? Why not just leave that money to the U.S. and let them keep it and spend it how they see fit? Like
Well,
I
that's
just
like
don't.
that's
It's
like
hard to
that's like
justify
being a
NATO.
that's like being a celebrity and having like 5 big armed security guards. And then after 5 years of not getting touched, you're like, well, why do I even have these guys? Nothing ever happens. I think the reason why nothing ever happens is partly because you've got 5 big security guards surrounding
Yeah.
you. I
In
think
that
that
example, though, you're Superman.
yeah, but we're not impermeable. We're not immortal. We can't do everything alone. I think NATO as it stands is a perfect not I wouldn't say sidekick, but there will be situations where maybe NATO is left to their not because we are NATO, but there will be times where maybe in a World War scenario, the United States is maybe handling China and European nations and NATO are handling Russia. I think that as it stands right now, NATO being under American leadership is the best scenario. They buy our weaponry, they buy our ammunition. Um, us leading the charge. I think we're the most militarily experienced nation in NATO. I personally would prefer NATO to be on some level subservient to or in junior position to United States leadership in NATO. I don't
Hold on,
want
hold on.
NATO to
So
be this
let me ask you
autonomous
a question.
force.
Let me ask you a question, like because of the way you said that, right? So
Okay.
I initially kind of proposed U.S., NATO, Ukraine, and NATO, and you kind of pushed back and said, "Excuse me, so sorry."
Mhm.
Said you wanted Ukraine to be in NATO, right? That was kind of your position. You thought it was
Yeah.
good. Kind of like what are you gonna do, Putin? You're a bitch, right? Anyway, like I
Yeah.
mean, I'm paraphrasing, but uh,
Effectively.
yeah. So why would you, if we already have a level of insulation, like it's U.S. then NATO, why wouldn't we want another step further with that insulation for Ukraine in your mind?
The problem is that leaving Ukraine as a non-NATO buffer state didn't work because Putin said, "Well, you guys aren't NATO, so I could just roll in this bitch and I don't have to worry about Article 5."
Well,
By making
I think it
Ukraine
did work. You don't think that like this grinding out war is exactly what we wanted? Like, I mean, like I hate to sound like a dick, but and people are fighting and dying over there. But this has been wonderful for the U.S. We've exposed Russia. We've exposed their tech. They're getting their tech destroyed. You just mentioned earlier they're having major losses with their naval fleet. I mean, all of this sounds like a win. We're selling them some of our like 50-year-old tech that's taken out like their modern stuff. And so it's crazy to me that you don't think this one is not acting as intended.
I think things are going I think I think things are going just fine right now. I think that we can't have an infinite rerun of Russia thinking that they're this big bad nation that can do whatever they want, get their ass kicked, and then they go back and resupply and come back. We don't want an infinite loop. What we want right now is to cause as much damage to Russia economically and militarily as possible. And then from there, once we're done basically chewing them up and spitting them out, we probably get demands that are reasonable. Some kind of demand that involves Ukraine joining NATO, because that's going to happen. We don't want Russia to come back. We want to limit the amount of nations that they can invade to, I guess, satisfy their imperialistic desires. So we don't want constant reruns and reruns and reruns. I think this is a great situation we have right now to de-arm, to defund the Russian military, but we don't want infinite loops. For the sake of global peace, it's for the best if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO. And if Russia is insane enough to do it a second time, then shit. I mean, or a third time, then shit. I mean, I don't know what to say. But at least that time, we will confront them as a unit and destroy them effectively.
Yeah, but isn't that the problem though, right? So with Ukraine, we can have this almost like endless, like, and this is, I just like, I really do feel bad saying this, but this is good for us. Like, I mean, I hate to be the guy that's saying the quiet part out loud, but like an endless war in Ukraine for Russia is the best case scenario for the U.S. Like that, like, if they're fighting them for the next 40 years, like that's great for us because guess what? They're not expanding. They're wasting their troops. They're like their oil dollars probably going down. They're having problems all across the board, you know, with whatnot, everything. They're going to run out of people at some point. I mean, that's callous, but it's not like they're China or India where they have a plethora of people. You know, they're eventually going to run low. You know, and so an endless war status quo for them, where our military industrial complex is pumping out new stuff to try, and we're selling it to them in bulk, seems like the best case scenario for us. So why would we want to move it to where they're in the Ukraine as part of NATO, and now we're suddenly required to
Hold
act
on.
on our full force and like potentially ensure like mutually assured destruction with nuclear war? I don't see why that would be better than an endless war status quo for Ukraine, for us at least.
We're not selling them new weapons. We're giving
I mean,
them
I
old.
know. I
Yeah.
mean, currently
The
we
way
are.
that it's benefiting the United States is recently in the last year, because in 2023, Biden turned into a neocon on his stance on oil and gas. Our crude oil actually topped Trump's peak a few months back, and we are the number one distributors of oil and gas to the EU. We supplanted Russia, I think, in November of last year.
40
So,
chests.
yeah, so Biden might have pissed off a lot of environmentalists, but at the same time, he's bringing on a lot of moderates with a move like that. And, leftists really aren't that popular off the internet, so I think it's a really smart plan for him in the election as well. But yeah, that move has happened. But again, I just want to keep harping on this point because the whole point is like, what is the future in NATO? Like, I just don't see a reason for NATO. We keep the treaty part where if you the Article 5's part, you attack one of us, you attack all of us. But like, unless we give the enforcement mechanism more power to actually be its own army and move independently as an army of the coalition, then I just don't see a reason why the
So,
United States should filter the money through 5 middlemen
if I
and
may,
then get the watered down version of it.
I think that saying, well, aside from the Article 5 part, why do we even have this when it doesn't do anything, is kind of missing the point. The Article 5 is the point in bringing in countries that otherwise would face threat of aggression by states such as Russia or China or things like that. The Article 5 part is what gives them pause, what makes them not go to war and invade like they did in Ukraine. So, for
I
example,
agree.
if we were to extend an offer of NATO membership to countries outside of the Atlantic sphere, such as Japan, or maybe the Philippines, giving what China and the Philippines are doing to each other right now, or China is mainly doing to the Philippines right now,
Or Israel.
addressing it to the, yeah, a whole host of countries, right? That would be the point, is saying America primarily will come to their military defense. It's a promise, right? And if they strike at you, we will strike at them. And that would be the point of having that. What
I
more
agree.
teeth would we need?
But see that NATO does other things, like the actual missions that they go on are for piracy and
Yeah, but
peacekeeping missions and such.
that's a
Like,
secondary thing. That's like that's
yeah,
a bonus, I
I say
guess.
we eliminate all that and then make that. I say we give them more power, turn them into a larger standing army, actually have NATO recruitment in countries that are NATO friendly, give them a nice sized standing army that can contest, not just rely on the US to go in and throw some of their extra money off to the side to get these, like, yeah, and I don't mean to say lesser like they're any less human being, but they're not trained by the best nation in the history of military combat. Like, I'd rather have US train that dollar that goes to NATO, I'd rather have it spent on the US military and have us take in more troops, train more troops, and have that readiness aspect a little bit elevated here because we can do it better than training troops with NATO. I don't understand why we even have
Well, for the
anything
U.S.,
besides the pact.
yeah, and I'll let you go after me, Shockway. But for the U.S., at least for recruiting soldiers and things like that. We aren't meeting our recruiting goals, but it's not because we're of lack of funding. That is not why we aren't meeting our recruiting goals. More dollars into recruitment or spending it on the U.S. soldier isn't going to give us a big as return on investment as doing it in training in other countries that have no such recruiting problems as that. And it's just a matter of the bang for your buck, if you will. But that's a separate argument, and I don't want to get too involved in that, and I want to give it to 𝕲𝖓 right now. So 𝕲𝖓, go ahead.
Yeah, Tyler, just a quick question. In terms of having NATO like expand like that, or have the roles you want them to play, how do you how would you do that without them coming across or being like excessively like imperialistic in their actions? Um,
The same things that they do, the same things that the U.S. does now. There's always going to be a contingent that thinks you're imperialistic, but like to preserve Pax Americana, the U.S. has to do some stuff. And the same way NATO would kind of do for the world. You know, the U.S. could take a back road, give some troops money to NATO, and then we wouldn't need as big of an army here. You know, like I'm saying, like every government makes, but let's say hypothetically, just 10% of their army
I gotta
goes to NATO.
disagree with you on that, broski.
Fuck
No,
that.
I'm just offering this as an alternative. I either say we give them more teeth and give them an army, or we just take all that shit away and keep the pact that if you attack one of us, you attack all of us.
I
Because, like,
say less teeth.
yeah,
It
I
gives
mean,
us
that's
more power globally. It gives us the ability to dictate more. I think that where it stands right now, we get to call the shots. We're the biggest player in the game, and that allows us to make a lot of decisions that other nations can't make, and it decreases the amount of rivals. Personally, I don't want Europe to be able to compete with us militarily. I want them to be in this perfect little space where they can whoop Russia's ass, but not our ass. And I think they're in that space right now, and I would prefer for things to remain that way.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
completely valid. I'm
but
just saying
so
we need to go one way or the other.
well, no, I mean, this is the kind of like the proxy thing, right? And this is the whole problem I have with the whole Article 5, right? So, like, say Turkey gets attacked. I just, and this is really, I think Turkey is one of my big issues with NATO, right? Like, Turkey is not our friend, right? And NATO is basically our proxies in all fairness, right? And so, if Turkey got attacked by, I don't know, the reborn Syria tomorrow, right? Then we would be obligated under Article 5 to go in and defend Turkey with all our might, right? And I don't know that that's going to cause less conflict, right? I feel like that's just going to be a greater red line that's going to draw in everybody. And that's kind of been a critique of NATO for years, right? And that's the reason I don't want Ukraine in there. If we go and we purposely accept Ukraine into NATO, now Article 5 is kicked in, and we are required to send in the boys, right? Like, I don't know that that's why would we want to have American troops dying when we could keep them not a NATO country and still they get a lot of the benefits, but we get this endless war cycle that weakens Russia. I don't know why y'all think it's a good thing to force Russia's hand into forcing our hand into getting involved. That sounds like a real bad thing. I mean, it's much better if other people are fighting China and Russia for us than us having to do it ourselves and potentially getting drawn into nuclear war. Like, it's a real concern.
Because
at what
Russia,
point do you
bitch.
just take the moral stand though? Like at some point you got to say
Yeah,
like,
yeah, the
we're
moral
not doing
stand
this
is
anymore.
America first.
Well,
Well, I
probably have a little
think that we're
disagreement on
always gonna
that.
have to pay a price in blood to maintain peace. I mean, everyone's always had to do that. I mean, the point of the point of what I think I get what you're trying. I think in some way you're kind of like this is sick, but I get where you're coming from in terms of like, okay, this is crazy. I think that the NATO way of doing things is a lot better. I understand what you're trying to say, but I think that the NATO method of doing these things, instead of having people not be like our direct members and using them as like buffer states, I think that having Ukraine be a part of NATO is it's for the best. Russia needs to have their imperialistic desires it needs to sunset. They need to realize there is no Ukraine joining your
Yes.
federation. Sweden's not an option. Finland's not an option. Chill out. It's not just de-arming and defanging Russia, but it's also trying to convince the Russian people you're not America. You're not going to be an empire. You're not going to conquer. There is a limit to how far you can go. We've shown you this by funding your enemy, Ukraine, and disarming you and defunding you and destroying you. You need to calm down. Russia right now is in a place of national delusion where they seem to think that they are equal and they're willing to do everything in their power to make that seem to be the case. And we're showing them that that's not the case. The problem is they're completely irrational and delusional. I mean, look at what 𝕵𝖫𝖎𝖙 did. Look at what Medvedev does. Look at all of these different members of the Russian state and former members, because you know they fall out of windows all the time. this is not a state that we want having the ability to constantly invade. Article 5 will be our best way of saying, look, we showed you what we would do to you the first time. We will fund the people you invade, but this time we're going to come together and stop this invasion. Frankly, I think had we put NATO nations in Ukraine before the invasion, it probably wouldn't have happened. Now that is wild. That is a risky one. It's a risky one. It's a crazy one. But I do believe Russia fears Article 5. How could they not? Look at their inability to defeat the Ukrainians. How could they not fear Polish people? How could they not fear the Germans, the Brits? How could they not fear the United States looking at how they're struggling with the Ukrainians?
Okay. I do want to expand it beyond a little bit Ukraine and talk a little bit about so I guess to you, Admiral Gibbs, I would ask this. Are you against expansion of NATO in general then? Like, do you think that we should kind of like lock membership as is right now and not accept new members just period? Or what would be your criteria for accepting a new NATO member in your opinion?
So, well, that's interesting because the current system is what in the new. Just to make sure I don't say something stupid. I'm pretty sure the current system is what everybody's got to agree on a new member in NATO. Is that the current system? I think that. I think that's.
I'm not 100% sure in that.
I don't know if that's entirely true because I know
Yeah.
Hungary, they try to derail NATO at every turn and they're a part of NATO. So that might not be true.
Yeah, and I know, but okay, maybe I know that most do, and then like a country can outright reject somebody from getting in. And all right, I mean, I don't even know why I'm really asking this because what I'm about to say is probably going to bypass most of this. I think that there might need to be a real talk about a restructuring of NATO,
So
or
here's the steps just for my
Okay.
They do have veto power. I'm
yeah,
sorry. They have veto power.
just the steps for my audience. So one, there will be a session talks with NATO in Brussels. So you'll send in the people and you'll have talks about that, negotiate, make sure you're good to go there. You send a letter of intent to the Secretary General of NATO. The protocols are signed by the NATO members and ratified. The Secretary General invites a potential member to accede or accept the treaty. And then the invitees accede or accept the treaty according to their national procedures. And after depositing their instruments of accession with the U.S. State Department, they become a NATO member. So that is the official process.
what was it? The last one was the integration.
Yeah, they become a NATO member
Right.
at that point.
So there like I said, I think that there definitely needs to be a restructuring of NATO at the minimum. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I hate to be the guy that's sitting here talking a populist talking point, but the world stage changes, right? And I keep looking at countries like Turkey, right, that are not really our ally, and there's real concern. Oh, we're going to put them. Are we going to put them in the F-35 program so they're fully integrated with the U.S. and whatnot? Countries like this. Do we want the F-35 tech being able to be easily accessed by Russia and China? I feel like it's a real risk with Turkey, right? I feel like there's they've also stopped like I said the Finnish countries up there. I think they stopped Sweden from getting in. They vetoed them because of their support for one of the Kurdish groups. So I feel like there needs to be a real talk about who's in NATO first of all, and if we should restructure it. Like, no, I don't think I'm opposed to maybe expanding NATO, but I also think that maybe we should consider decreasing NATO, right? Like, it maybe change it from the North Atlantic, whatever, to like the world, ocean treaty or something kind of thing, and then include, Japan, who's basically, the 51st state right in there, or like South Korea, or but I think you're gonna have a hard time with how you do some of these because some of these countries also like hate each other. Japan, South Korea, not the best of friends, right? Like, and kind of in the Philippines, they kind of hate a lot of
And
people,
having
right?
a treaty to perhaps bind them a little bit might
Yeah, but
help
yeah,
alleviate.
it
I mean,
could,
it doesn't
I
always.
mean,
It doesn't always.
right.
There's been some
So
clashes in the past.
so
but
basically, I'm not opposed to expanding it, but like I said, I think it needs more teeth with military action. Like, if it's going to be expanded, then these countries need to be taking part in interests that benefit us. They need to be willing to do it. While at the same time, maybe we need to talk about who's in NATO because there's a couple countries that I mean are
Which ones?
basically.
Which ones would you kick out?
I mean, Turkey's number one on my list. I mentioned them a few times. There's been maybe what was somebody mentioned Hungary. I don't know. I'd have a hard like Hungary's pretty strategically placed.
Canada.
Canada. We need them for their war crimes abilities. But
Facts.
they come up with stuff I never would have thought of. I guess living out in the wilderness really teaches you. But I just, yeah, I mean, so no, I'm not against expansion, and like I'm really not altogether opposed to NATO funding in general. Because I want Pax Americana. In fact, I'll openly advocate for more imperialistic policies from America. But at the same time,
So
whenever
why
we're
are you
dealing with
against funding Ukraine in this case?
because we listen, we got to take care of some problems at home first, and I mean the border being number one. Like
Okay.
it's bad. It's an invasion.
Could I just say, if we return back to Trump's 2018 policies, we could fix most of the border issues without spending another dollar. Would you then be in support of funding Ukraine?
I don't have the specifics, so I can't 100% say yes. But yeah, if we're not spending more money on it, I mean, if we don't need to spend more money because the problem's actually taken care of, then sure, I would be okay with funding Ukraine to some extent. As long as it seems like a fair deal for us. I think another thing I think we should factor in is some of the stuff we've loaned to them, right? If they do hypothetically say something happens and a Russian general that's not corrupt takes over and he comes up with a brilliant strategy and forces the issue, which I mean is a possibility, everything's a possibility, or Russia breaks through somewhere and ends up winning the war overall, we have to remember if that's a real possibility, then we won't get our money back. That's a total loss. I mean, that's also something I think we need to factor in when we're funding, like in what we're giving to them as well. I mean, I think we just need a little more realistic approach on this proxy war than we
Well,
have at the moment.
Ukraine is worth more to us economically alive than dead. So I think
Sure.
making sure that they maintain their independence is economically more beneficial to us in the long term. Frankly, I don't want Russia having more access to more fuel, which is what they've gained as a result of taking Crimea. I don't want Russia to gain more access to more grain. I don't want Russia to become more wealthy as a nation right now because they've shown that they're not playing nice right now. They're being very mean. And to be honest, I do agree that in terms of NATO nations that I'm tired of, I would say Hungary's up there because Viktor Orban, he's clearly one of Putin's goons. Turkey is definitely untrustworthy to some extent, but I think keeping them close by with that alliance and being able to watch them closely and see what's going on is more beneficial than having them just wander off and do as they please and go any which way. I mean, Turkey's already shown with their lack of support for Israel that we can't trust these guys as far as we throw them. So it's very clear to me that I think we should keep a very, very close eye on them, and NATO allows us to do that. I think that one of the best things we could probably do, and you guys tell me if this is just naive, but I think that there would have to be a veto of a veto. Like at some point, we would have to ask Hungary and Turkey, okay, like your reasoning for why this nation shouldn't join NATO, like, is it bullshit or is it genuine? Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? Because what you're not going to do is derail this extremely important alliance because you have the ability to. So there would have to be some sort of leverage we would have over them to be able to say, look, like, these nations will join. It's for the benefit of the global economy. And I think that keeping them close is important, but I agree we do need to confront them at some point and do something about them because they're undermining NATO at every turn.
If you wanted to do anything about Iran involving NATO, you would kind of have to get Turkey out of the equation. Absolutely. I agree with everybody here. If there's one person we take out, it's got to be Turkey. Unfortunately, they'd be against expanding in any way to help Israel. And I would also say, instead of just Iran, China, Russia on the axis of evil in North Korea, we also add Gaza into there too. Axis to evil, Gaza.
Well, I mean, if whatever the axis is, I mean, like, so what's really scary about this is someone mentioned, I think maybe in your chat, that there is a like alternative alliance for it, right? Like the other winner of the Ukraine war has been, and this is gonna sound kind of funny when I say it, but North Korea. They're selling a lot of their old munitions to Russia, so they're getting rid of their old stock. They're getting their factories remodernized, and they're getting the economic influx of food, which it's really hard to have an army when you can't feed them, right? So I mean, North Korea is winning, and like small percentage increases for them are massive, right? So like, if you only like are making 100, like making 100 billion a year, and all of a sudden now you're making 150, you just like almost got half your economy in like 6 months, right? So a country like that is definitely benefiting from this kind of thing, and they are building this alternative structure. So I do see the need for a proxy state thing, but it's also like we don't need to just let every Tom, Dick, and Sally into in, right? Like, I mean, if we're gonna let Ukraine in, sometimes it's better to let shit grind than it is to like, oh, we're gonna duke it out with the nukes now, right? Like, I mean, there's a reason why you have proxy wars. We've had proxy wars throughout all of human history, right? You have empires and like their opposition. They'll fight the battles in the proxy wars, and it sucks for the people there, but it's a lot better than both empires going, all right, all in, baby, let's go. And that's kind of what, like, if we're just taking all these NATO members in, that's what's gonna happen. Is we're gonna automatically draw somebody into whatever first skirmish happens. And so the other thing is when we talk about exerting economic control over countries like Turkey, well, part of the benefits like, oh, well, we're gonna include you in the F-35 program, right? And I think the real concern for like countries like Hungary or like Turkey, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if they are included in the F-35 program. I know there's some exceptions. But with NATO tech, a lot of this stuff's supposed to be integrated between the militaries, interchangeable and whatnot. And if we're going to include them, then they're getting some of these tech secrets that other countries are now going to have access to if they're untrustworthy. Do we really want Iran having like U.S. drone tech? They already make pretty good drones, right? Do we want them having like the Iranian Reaper drones now? No, that sounds terrifying. It seems unwise, the current structure that we have NATO set me. And I mean, that's another reason I think maybe we should look at funding for them.
Hmm. We keep saying funding for NATO, but we do acknowledge that like there's no like NATO piggy bank. Like it is like everybody pays a certain amount of their GDP towards their defense. So I think that in terms of like funding NATO, we're really just funding our own defense budget. We're taking care of ourselves, and that we combine our defense budgets together, or our militaries together, to create the NATO alliance, so to speak. So I don't think that we're necessarily like paying. I don't think we're getting like cheated or shorted. I personally think that the American leadership of NATO is best. I think we should be spending more because we are a richer nation, and on top of that, I just don't feel comfortable with the UK leading the charge. So no offense to the British guys, I just don't want UK.
No
I don't want
offense to
Germany.
them. I
Yeah,
do
no
extend
offense to them.
but carry on.
Okay, okay. Well, I don't want them at the helm. I just don't want them lead. I don't trust them to be better at war than we are. I don't trust them to be better at making the decision making that we need to make. I mean, we saw how lackadaisical they were before. They're buying Russian oil, thinking that was somehow or another going to deter them from invading Ukraine. Now they invade, and now they're being funded by the very people that are eventually going to try and overtake. So I think Americans being at the helm, I think the United States being at the helm is extremely important for NATO. I think that as it stands, NATO is doing an amazing job. I think that the only issue we have I think the biggest issue we have right now, and some people might disagree with this, I think the biggest issue we have right now are domestic threats to NATO. We have a growing populist, politically naive, delusional segment of the Republican Party. It's not all, but it's some, who are completely willing to undermine American national and geopolitical security for some pipe dream of an isolationist United States where we're all Christian and we're all white, transracial. And I mean, it's true. We have an insane base of MAGAites that are undermining American national security by trying to undermine NATO, and I think that that's, and even more so than Hungary and Turkey, that's our biggest issue right now, is a base that's growing in the United States that could remove us from NATO if Trump were to win and significantly hamper our ability to defend ourselves.
Now, Trump does not want to leave NATO. I think this would be a really fun conversation for Wick to host one time. The myth of Trump that comes from people that are politically active but don't actually watch speeches or whatever. The mythos of Trump on his own side is that he was some sort of isolationist. And he wasn't. He escalated every war that we were in. He broke Obama's drone record for years. I want to say in 2018. He was just like, blew up everything he could. When he was asked on Fox News what he would do about Afghanistan, he said, I'd bomb the shit out of them and then dropped a fucking Moab on them. And like, I just think that like this idea that he was this anti-war isolationist rose up, and he's not going to not embrace it because that's maybe he can get some votes that way. But like, you can see it a lot with different subjects with Trump. Like, he doesn't want to leave NATO, but a good portion of his fan base, he's out there thumping the vaccines, talking about how great they are. He's the one responsible for them. Operation Warp Speed saved us from COVID. And there's a really large chunk of his base that are anti-vaccine, won't put it in them, blah, blah, blah. There's just a separation of like Trump, what he actually says. And then you see it on the left, people that hate him completely blow it out of the water, misinterpret what he's saying often or intentionally to make it look worse than it is. And the people on the right also doing the exact same thing. I think the mythos to Trump versus what he actually says are night and day.
I don't know. I think Trump is successfully radicalizing the base. I mean, we saw what happened when he said, "Go get vaccinated." You would have thought everybody in the rally was about to whoop his ass. I mean, everybody started booing. I was scared for Trump. I'm like, this old ass man is on this stage. Everybody's mad at him. It's not looking good. Trump has successfully created a monster that I don't even think he can control. Where there is a small segment of the Republican base that's slowly growing, that is demanding more and more radical energy from Republican politicians. So we could sit there and say, oh, well, Trump was the most, wild cowboy guy in foreign policy that we had in a while. This is the same guy that a few days ago said, Nikki Haley wants people to die. It's like, this is a guy who is basically starting to lean a little bit more into this anti-war, isolationist, populist angle, where even him, Vivek Ramaswamy, have played this angle of, people who want to defend Ukraine want more war, they want more death, they want more blood. They're playing this game, and the viewers of these speeches, of these, political punditry, they're seeing this and they're starting to absorb this information and push for this kind of action. So we can sit here and say, oh, well, right now it doesn't look like that. But slowly and surely, this MAGA wing is working further and further toward isolationism, toward wanting to turn their head away. And at some point, when that base becomes fully radicalized, if you will, or turned in that direction, people like Trump and the other politicians will be at their mercy and will have no choice but to implement these, policies in order to maintain the vote.
I don't think it'll ever get to that point, though, because like Trump himself, if you look at Trump's comments on Ukraine, he has never said he wants to cut funding to him. He likes Zelensky. He's not calling him a rat-faced weasel or whatever, like Tucker Carlson. He likes Zelensky. They had a perfect phone call together. He's a good guy. The impeachment or whatever from 2018, he said all nice things about him. He's never defamed himself. He's never once said he's going to pull out of Ukraine. He just keeps giving vague statements like the war will be over day one. Yeah, I'll nuke Moscow like I told him I would when I was in office and shit like that. So like Trump is not, again, like a lot of the people that agree with Trump don't actually agree with what he stands for on a lot of subjects. So
I think
I do
yeah.
want to pass it to Gibbs for a minute, and I want to give Shockwave an opportunity to get in as well if he wants.
So I think it's real rich to sit here and point at the Magites like as being the problem, right? They are a reaction to the real problem, which is the Dems. And I want to sit here, and the reason I'm going to say this is we're looking, you're talking about us wanting to be isolationist. And it's very easy to sit here and like, I'm not one of these, I'm not a Magite. I want to make that clear. But I am going to defend their point of view for at least a second here, just for funsies here. It's very easy for me to be sympathetic to their arguments. When I start looking at like the top 15 countries on the last report, which is like 2022 that I could find here for economic aid, and I see a ton of countries that hate us on this list, right? And it's just, I'm like looking like Sudan, Nigeria, Jordan, I guess they're our ally. Egypt, I guess they're our ally. Yemen, no. Afghanistan, well that worked out great. Ethiopia, Syria, like the Sudan, Kenya, Uganda. These countries don't like us, right? And we're just giving them barrels of money, but we sit here and we have a literal invasion, a literal foreign policy crisis going on down here, and then we're going to be vilified and told the Magites are the problem, they're the evil ones because they want to be isolated. I mean, it's very easy for me to sit here and go, what they're saying makes some kind of sense. Like, why are we giving all this money to these countries that hate us? And then we're going to sit here and then like fund NATO, which is, supposedly some of the richest countries in the world are in NATO, but only 35% of NATO is, carrying their weight. Like, I mean, you just look at these arguments and I go, man, it is a head scratcher why we're going to sit here and fund these countries and all this shit and then go, oh, yeah, the Magites are the problem. They have no basis of reality for wanting to have some isolationist tendencies. That's ridiculous.
I got to double down. They have no basis in reality. Less about 1% of our GDP goes toward foreign aid. So it's not like, it's funny that the MAGAites today are saying, well, the money that could be, I think Matt Walsh said, the money that could be on the tables of American children is going to foreign bureaucrats all around the world. When have Republicans ever wanted to put food on the plates of poor kids? We talk about foreign aid. when we talk about foreign aid, life expectancy rose from 65 years in 1990 to 72 in 2017 thanks to foreign aid. Maternal, infant, and child mortality rates have been cut in half. Smallpox has been defeated, polio eliminated in all but 2 countries. I mean, foreign aid makes the world a safer, healthier place. I mean, disease doesn't care about borders. It spreads everywhere. It makes other nations more capable of participating in the global economy. It makes for a more economically bountiful and prosperous world where war becomes significantly less likely amongst these poor and more, let's just call it insane countries. It's just for what we're paying 1% of our GDP to make the world safer and better and more economically prosperous. I don't think MAGAites are genuinely coming. I don't think they're coming from a genuine place when they complain about these things. Because when we look at the data, what we're getting in exchange in terms of health benefits, economic benefits for the world, in comparison to, the border problem is easily solvable. We've seen that Democrats and Republicans can very easily solve it. And of course, we have the pitter patter going on.
I hate to keep dogpiling on you, Gibbs, but he's right. Like, we don't need to spend more money to fix the border problem. I disagree with Joe Biden's handling of the border. I'll be a little more rough with him on it. We don't need more money to fix it. We need to reinstate policies that were icky to the Democrats because they came from Trump. There was no reason given for him dismantling Trump's border. He just dismantled, made up his own visa program, started like really loosening up asylum restrictions, like and letting judges are letting people. There's like an 8-year wait list right now on asylees. If they were staying in Mexico, the incentive for economic migrants to come up here and work for 8 years is now completely off the board, completely disincentivizing that asylum fraud that's going on. But it's a Trump policy, so it's icky. Again, we could fix this problem just by changing some things around. We don't have to spend another dollar.
Yeah, I gotta toss the ball to 𝕲𝖓. He's been quiet, and I want to make sure he doesn't get skipped over in all this. There's been a lot said, and I want to give him a chance if he has things that he wants to say, positions he wants to take, that he gets that chance to say it. So go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot to say. I think I am realizing that a lot of my research for this debate was focused more so on the history of NATO as opposed to sort of what we can do in the modern day. In terms of Trump, I think Trump is he's a guy who's gonna say whatever the hell he wants to say to get elected. I think you saw when he was campaigning in 2016, he was saying all kinds of shit about Hillary. He was saying all kinds of shit about NAFTA. He was saying all kinds of shit about outsourcing jobs. And the reality is he just wanted to get a vote. I think this time around, what's going to help him get a vote is his current base of like the hardcore MAGA voters who basically are just going to vote for him, and that's kind of it. So he can kind of say whatever he wants. He can rile them up in whatever way he chooses to. And like I said earlier, I think he's going to try to harp on this border thing as much as possible. I think he's just going to hammer that down, and try to make that look like the weak point for Biden. I don't think his base is very educated, but I don't think 95% of the voter base in general is very educated. So yeah, I mean, Trump just strikes me as someone who he could say one thing, he could be like, totally, I want to be an isolationist, and then get like 2 or 3 foreign policy guys around him who are like, that's fucking stupid, and then he'll do something different. And then, you know what I mean? And that's just kind of seems to be like the kind of leader Trump is. And it's going to be like, the question will be, what benefits Trump? And then he's going to go do that. And then if there's someone in front of him that is going to do something different, he'll fire them and hire somebody else until he runs out of people. And maybe he'll hire one of us on this panel if it gets bad enough.
You're right, but you could make the argument against Clinton with his first year was a terrible, second year not so good, and then he got different advisors. The House went Republican, and his third and fourth year he smashed it up.
Thank you. Did you give me a raid, Brittany Simon, or are you just here? Either way, thanks for showing up. Appreciate you being here. Continue on, and I want to give Gibbs some space too because there's been a lot of shit talk on Gibbs's boys here. So go ahead, finish up, and then we'll go.
Yeah, I was just like, what you're saying about Trump is absolutely true. He absolutely does it, and I'd say he does it more often than a lot of politicians. You can make the same point with Biden. He came into office, he was condemning Saudi Arabia. He took the Houthis off the terrorist watch. He stopped selling lethal weapons to Ukraine and did all these things to like kind of go against kind of what Trump did, make less war in the. And a lot of them ended up biting him in the ass, and then later on he had to go back and change them. Now we're giving Ukraine even more deadly shit than Trump.
Yeah,
I
I
wouldn't
think
say the war is his fault, but you can blame him a little bit for pulling back.
I think with Trump, my concern though, I guess it's just I almost said the ceiling, but then the floor for him is way lower, right? So like Biden, Clinton, whoever, they're going to say stuff that is going to get them elected. But like, if Trump can get away with absolutely taking over the entire government and turning into a dictatorship, he'll do it if somebody lets him. You know.
I don't think so. We had a debate on that. I went through the entire Trump presidency, all the policies, all the decrees, all the things. The dude gave away his power like 20 different times, gave his power to people in his cabinet. And then the Republicans started using policy that was on the books from, I think, 1994, where they would be able to vote on what these cabinet, executive branch departments were doing, and was like voting on their rules, voting them down and what. So he was, in a way, pushing his powers back to the Congress 30, 40 times. And then there's instances, a bunch of times where he met with judges. Every single time the judges said you can't do something, he didn't do it. Biden, you could argue, ignored the judges on the student loan program, on the fuck was it? The eviction moratorium. The court said you can't do this again, and he just turned around and reinstituted it. So, like, you can argue that Trump's better at listening to authority than Biden is.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to educate myself more on the issue, to be honest. But the student loan thing never went completely through, did it?
No, the courts blocked it. And like Biden, Pelosi, they were all saying this is something he can't legally do. He knew he couldn't do it, and he said, "You know what? We're going to try it." And
He used the COVID thing. I forget what that was called, but then he could do it. I don't know if he used this, but at some point he was considering using the 1952 Higher Education Act too. I don't know how that went, but I know he had a couple of
just pause for a moment, both of you. Sorry. We got a hype train on Twitch, so if you want to give me money, now's the time on Twitch. Send in some gift subs, send in some bits, all that, and super chats help too. Money's good. Really appreciate you. Sorry, capitalist had to shill just a minute. Carry on, please. And I do want to get Gibbs back in here too, because I know Gibbs.
Sorry,
yeah. I was going to say Gibbs. Go ahead, Tyler. I don't have anything else on that. If you don't,
you're good. I got that.
Well, so I mean, really, all right. Once again, I am not a Magite, so this is not my point of view I'm defending right here, and so I'm just sympathetic, right? Like, so like it's hard to like articulate some of this, but I'm gonna try to be my best Trumper that I can be right now for y'all. All right, and push back against this.
Well,
once again, yeah, that's what I'm gonna be right now for the. This is not Gibbs endorsing anything what he's about to say. I'm just gonna try to give you all the position of what I know a lot of people are thinking, because I feel like y'all are definitely discrediting this position. I think there is some validity to this, right? So the first point I want to address is the global economy is good, the aid is good, we prevented these things in these countries. Those are all well and noble things. I'm very happy that we've accomplished that. That's good. There's also been a lot of times that this money has just been thrown into basically money pits, and corruption has taken over in some of these countries. Like Nigeria, they just discovered something like 20 oil rigs equaling out to like several $1 billion off their coast. Like, who are building oil rigs? I don't know. Somebody that's got a lot of money that, like, I mean, I didn't know that was just so easy to do. Like, these are corrupt nations, most of these countries on this list, that are getting massive amounts of money. So the idea that like a lot of this isn't just disappearing into our enemies is laughable. It is. That's what's happening. Like, let's just be real. The world's not a happy-go-lucky place. It's a very bad, evil place, right? Worldwide, right? So the money's going to our enemies in a lot of places. These countries aren't really showing that big of results. I mean, sure, we can point to a few really good victories, like smallpox. Yeah, no polio. That's good. Yay. Woo. But like overall, that's one relatively small victory. And I know that seems like on its face, like eliminating smallpox doesn't seem like, oh, that seems like that's a big deal. It is a big deal. But in comparison to like, if we're gonna really exert change over a country where their country's lives are day to day better and whatnot, all we've done is replace it with a new disease. There's a new disease there that's gone on because they haven't built the medical infrastructure. These countries haven't done things to like secure their future. They've been useless with their aid. It's been bad, right? So for a Magite to sit here and go, oh, so I can look at this and I don't see a return on our investment, or at least not a high enough ROI, right? They're gonna go. I mean, this seems like it was bad. Trump said he was trying to pull us out, and to some degree, yeah, he did engage in more wars than the other, but he also did it remotely. He used more drones. And he used more special forces when it came to ISIS, and ISIS took a whooping, right? Like they got beat. Like ISIS is no more really, and that was a lot of Trump. And he didn't do it as direct or put nearly as many boots on the ground as previous presidents had, with like Obama with the surge, or Bush Jr. with, I mean, any of Bush Jr.'s policies really. I mean, so you can look at this and go, okay, he seemed like he was changing the style of war he was waging, and it seemed like he was also getting foreign policy wins. Like he's the first president to go talk to North Korea and see what's going on there. That's interesting. But like at the same time, he looked like he was making realistic policy goals that actually benefited America to some extent, because I know this globalist talking point that Dems want to put forward about the global economy is good, but when it's building up our enemies, that's not good, right? Or it's building up countries that hate us, that's not good. Why are we funding countries like Yemen, who just is a total mess? We've basically given money to a country that's now housing like the Houthis. I mean, like we're just having all sorts of problems all over the place, and I just don't understand why we can sit here and act like they don't have some kind of
Okay.
like point to
Well,
this
I
issue.
just before you respond to that, I do want to acknowledge some of you guys has to go in about half an hour here, so I want to make sure we get to everything I wanted to get to. Rashad, you can respond to that real quick if you like, but then I want to get to some other. They're related, right? But I do want to drive the discussion forward a little bit.
Yeah, I think foreign aid is just a part of the game. I think it's a part of the game that has to be played. I think that a lot of people in the Republican Party who are really, really upset about money going to foreign countries, we have a border problem. I'm going to bring it right back. I'm saying that we've had solutions be made for the border, and Republicans, because they're not getting a winner-takes-all scenario, are, for whatever reason, crashing the bill. Now, we've proven, I think the Biden administration has given concessions that I don't think they wanted to give. I don't think Joe Biden wants to be the guy that shut down the border, but I think that he's willing to take those hits in order to make those deals necessary to send money to Ukraine. When we talk about money going to Yemen, I mean, we got to remember that the Houthis do not have unfettered control over Yemen. We're talking about a region of the world that had a civil war, that still has faction-based warfare going on, which might be the reason why we're still funding the Yemeni government, and not specifically the Houthis. There are so many other factors that go into why we send money to other countries besides, do they like us? Do they not like us? Because even if nations may not necessarily like us, they might have disease issues, or they may trade with us even if they might not necessarily like us. They might trade with us, right? We want to make sure that they have the What's up?
Yeah, let me ask this. So you just mentioned like, okay, there's disease issues. If a country we don't like, and this is going to sound callous, but if they're a country we don't like that hates us is having disease issues, why are we going in there and propping? Like, I get the argument from like the moralist standpoint. It's a good thing to do. These people are suffering, yay! But maybe not in America first, like idea, right? Like, if say Yemen all of a sudden tomorrow had smallpox nationwide, and the Houthis were getting smallpox, is that necessarily a bad thing for America? Like,
Yeah, but it doesn't
why are
stop
we?
at Yemen though.
Eh,
It goes further,
I think we'll be
doesn't it?
okay. I think we'll be
I
all right.
mean, I think maybe all of us in this call might be okay, but some people might drop dead. I mean, like at the end of the day, like it has consequences. I mean, look at what COVID did. I mean, when we look at
Oh,
what
COVID, yeah.
when we look at what, even if you don't take the virus itself seriously, I'm not gonna argue that anybody fears COVID. But when we look at the economic response that nations made to it, do we want a rerun of that? Do we want a rerun of the shutdowns? Do we want to? It's in our best interest to keep disease contained, to defeat disease, to promote the economic viability and participation of other nations, even if they're not necessarily our best friends. We want to promote economic participation, which benefits everybody. So I think that what people who are like more MAGAites, who are like really, really upset about all this funding and all this money, number one, it's a significantly small amount of our GDP. We're not making these nations any richer. We're not making them any more
It's
powerful.
a massive amount of money to these other countries. Like,
I mean,
if
it's
we're giving,
when we divvy it up, it's really not that much that we're
so
sending to these countries.
Look,
If we divide it all up,
yeah, but the percentage is big. Like, that's why I mentioned North Korea earlier. Like, if North Korea is only doing, I don't know what the numbers, I'm just gonna make a round number, 100 billion a year. I know they have a really small economy. They're making 100 billion a year. All of a sudden, now they're doing 50 billion a year in arms sales to Russia. Once again, these numbers are all made up. That's a massive increase. Say it was only like 10 billion a year, right? That's still, they just increased their economy like 10%, right? Now this country is gaining power and their percentage increases are massive, right? And so that's going to be a huge influx, a boon to these countries. And I use North Korea because, I mentioned them earlier, but say we take Yemen or something, for example, we're funding them like 22, it was over $1 billion, right? I don't know what Yemen's national GDP is at the moment, but I'm assuming since they have a three-faction civil war, probably not that high, right? But we're giving them $1 billion. I'm sure that's a massive amount of their uh, GDP, which is going to lead to a massive cash
Okay.
influx in that
I
country. That's a
gotta
problem.
throw a flag on the play here, because
Okay.
I do want to kind of get to a couple other major points, and I know we have at least one caller. There was two that wanted to talk to all of you before we ended it, and so we're gonna try to crush this all into something before 8 that we can do for you all. Lightning round. If Trump is elected in 2024, do you think that the American position in the world order gets better or worse? Are we stronger or are we weaker than with Biden at the helm? Lightning round. Go ahead. What do you think? We'll start with Shockwave and we'll work our way around. Shockwave, better or weaker?
Just one word answers.
Brief answers.
If I had to guess, I would just say weaker, just because in general, I think Trump comes off as very just unpredictable.
Okay. What do you think, Tyler?
That was going to be my point. Trump is unpredictable, and Biden just kind of like, man, he just looks old. It's hard to say he has full mental acuity right now.
And wait, so is that a point towards
Trump? I would say Trump it's safer with Trump, just because I don't.
Okay, so
Biden
the
looks
world
like
gets
you should take the
safer with
keys away
Trump
from
at
him.
the helm. Okay.
I think his answer is it's fucked either way.
Okay.
I think that's
what do you think? What do you think, Gibbs?
I think better. I think the reason why is Trump may be isolationist to some degree, but he is pro-military, pretty big pro-military, and I think that Biden has been a disaster foreign policy wide. So I think Trump's unpredictability is an asset when it comes to negotiations.
Okay, Rashad.
I think Trump's pro-military too. Just don't get captured. Just don't get captured. If you get captured, he's not so pro you anymore. But just as long as you don't get captured, you're good. I think that Trump is too unpredictable. I think that he's the kind of guy where if you get in his ear and say the right thing at the right time, you can make him do some things that he probably would regret. I think that although Biden is clearly at death's door and has about his foot and probably his knee in the grave, he's been doing really well in foreign policy. I mean, I don't know who's in his ear. Maybe it's because he's, from that old guard of just, doing things. But I think in terms of foreign policy, Joe Biden has done an amazing job. He's predictable. He's reliable in terms of foreign policy. He makes fast moves. He cut off that Israel-Palestine conflict from Iranian intervention. I'd say the world is safer with Joe Biden at the helm than Trump.
Okay. With that, I'm going to open it up for the last 20 minutes here to our guests here. But before I do, just briefly, can you shout out where people can find you, gang? And we'll start with Rashad, go the opposite way. Rashad, where can people find you?
You guys can find me at Rashad Crenshaw on YouTube.
Gibbs?
You can find me at Admiral Gibbs on pretty much everything.
Gotcha. Tyler?
Average Debate Enjoyer, YouTube and Twitter. Just love to argue.
Finally, Shockwave.
Yep. So Shockwave on YouTube, that's SHOCK and then _WAY.
Excellent. Thanks for being here, gang. It's been great, and don't leave until 8, right? Because I do want your opinions on these. We got a couple of people in here who've been banging at my DMs trying to get in, so we'll let them in, and we'll see how this goes. You're live.
Hello.
Hi. So you guys have been listening. What are some of your thoughts on this discussion? Do you have any questions for the people in the panel, or for just to propose in general? Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I told me and myself and Tyler have set this up so that way we can just ping off of each other here. First off, I have a question for Rashad that's tangential to what you guys said in the lightning round. How exactly did Joe Biden make into poly decisions the world a better place compared to what Trump did?
I think his response to the conflicts that went off were a lot more reliable. Like, for example, I'm not particularly confident that if October 7th happened under Trump, that he would curtail Israel's aggression as much as Joe Biden has tried to. In terms of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, I think Trump has been a little bit too vague. I think he's been a little bit too indirect, and I can't trust and say for a fact that his actions would curtail a third Russian invasion. I can't say that I trust it. In fact, I think that his desire for a deal is probably just gonna, kick the conflict down the line, give him the ability to say, "Hey, look, guys, I stopped the war. I'm the greatest ever," which is probably what he'll do. And I don't think that it actually solves the problem long term. So, in terms of response, I'd say that Biden has, in my opinion, is handling things better than Trump would.
Two things on Israel. Okay. Who revoked the terrorist status of the Houthis?
Joe Biden.
Okay. Who is currently selling substantial amount of arms to Israel right now and approving their transfer?
I would imagine Joe Biden is the one funding.
So there's no tangible, actual difference between what Trump would do with Israel versus what Biden would do, other than the fake overtures of, "Oh no, calm down, guys," as Netanyahu knows that the United States is not going to stop him in any actual way.
Trump is a guy that kind of escalated the conflict by moving. What did he move the embassy from?
He escalated
Tel Aviv to
conflict.
Jerusalem.
What conflict arose from that?
Well, can I push back on the foul? I just want to say that Trump, I think the perception is a lot of people think that Trump is going to give Israel much more free hand. So as opposed to like right now, the Biden administration, I think is thinking that Trump's like the Biden's like reining them in like, "Hey, don't do this. It's war crimes." Whereas they think Trump's going to be like, "Hey, listen, just get it over with."
Yeah, I don't know. I think Trump would want a deal to substantiate peace in the Middle East, which he was trying to do with the Abraham Accords. So I would assume that he was trying to push.
Yeah, but I mean, Hamas undid that whole like.
That's fine, but you're giving Biden credit for nothing because he doesn't actually do anything. He didn't create more peace. He didn't stop Israel from doing anything.
Well, I mean, Biden he's not omnipotent, right? He can't stop.
Yeah, but the issue is you gave him credit for making the world a safer place by responding to Israel by giving them more weapons and making Houthis not terrorists, and then realizing the fuck up and then making them terrorists again. You're giving credit where it doesn't belong. That's like giving a medal to somebody blowing up kids in the Middle East.
Yeah, but I mean, Joe Biden rescinding the terrorist thing for the Houthis, that didn't like automatically cause a problem. The Houthis did what they wanted to do.
It gave them funding. It allowed them funding to where they wouldn't have to spend it on food. They could fund the money towards guns and ammo. That's
okay. If that's true, then I'll concede. I don't mind conceding my point if that's true. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, I'll concede.
To be clear, the reason that that Biden took the Houthis off the terrorist watch list is because there was a humanitarian crisis in Yemen in that region, and at least the stated reason was to get
taking an L on that one.
Who started the humanitarian crisis
into the region, right?
Who started the humanitarian crisis?
Saudi Arabia and
no, the Houthis did. Saudi Arabia came in at the request of the
hold on.
Yemeni government to save the fucking country.
Yes, but the point here is that these putting the Houthis on the watch list make it much harder for countries, including America, to get aid and foreign aid in general.
Fungible
That's
aid.
the problem the Magites have right there, though, is they're arguing that why are we even aiding these people in the first place? This is Iran, Saudi Arabia proxy war. Right? Why are we okay, so we're maybe less involved there than other places, right? Because these two powers are duking it out instead.
Well, if your point is you shouldn't give them aid at all, then we just have a fundamental disagreement. I think we absolutely should give humanitarian aid when we can.
Even if it's proven that most of that aid goes to the military force that's trying to negatively.
You're just seeing
the same thing.
Yeah, your argument. This is my argument: is that to a lot of Republicans and Magites, I mean, Republicans in general, I think are sympathetic to this argument. Is that just basically what he just said? If I'm going to go and feed these people, and who's getting fed? Well, if it's the army of the people that are causing the humanitarian crisis on either side, then you're not really fixing the problem. All you're doing is actually escalating the problem because now these people are well fed. So in addition to instead of them having to scrounge for food, now they're able to not spend that money on food. They can spend it on drones.
Yeah. I do like this conversation. Can we maybe revisit that? Because I want to hit NATO a little bit.
Yeah. So you want me to go ahead and hit the Germany thing?
Yeah, go ahead, because I want to follow it up.
Rashad, I warned you. Like when you asked me about this, I was going to bring this up. Why would you say that NATO is good when it is not fit for purpose as it stands right now, with the all countries involved having independent strategic plans for how to deal with Russia, including Germany, who tried to do strategic economic entanglement, which was retarded?
I wouldn't call that retarded. I'd say
Hold on,
it was dumb as shit. Like they've tried it 4 fucking times now, and it's
let
never
me
worked out.
Hold on.
Let him answer the question, and I'm
explain.
curious what Tyler has to think.
Well, are you? Do you have more? Are you going to say more?
Yeah, I'm gonna explain the strategic economic entanglement for people who may not know. So Germany had a plan to bring in Russia's resources and Germany's economic industrial powerhouse to manufacture together and entangle their economies to such an extent that it would dissuade Russia from doing anything that may damage Germany's economy, and by proxy demolish Russia's economy in the process. This is what is called strategic economic entanglement. The issue with that in the long term was that all this did was say, hey, look, Germany, you can't do anything to Russia's economy when they try to invade, let's say, Ukraine, because you're going to fuck up your own economy by doing so. That's the retardation, because Germany has
I'm not understanding how this makes NATO obsolete in its purpose or ineffective. I mean, Russia, in spite of having that economic connection to Germany, of course they crashed out and did what they did. But Russia's not succeeding right now. They're not doing as well as they thought they would. They're struggling right now. So clearly, NATO, even at its lackluster operating capacity, has still been able to stifle Russia's imperialistic goals to a great degree. So when you say that because Germany did blah blah blah, and NATO's not as great as we might think, or isn't operating as good as it could, I would have to disagree with you. I would say that we're doing quite fine in spite of our blunder.
Okay, so you have several issues going on all at once. How is Germany's military right now?
I would imagine it's not. I would imagine it's not as good as the UK.
It
or
is
Russia,
worse now
UK or America
than it was a year ago. Germany has stated, I think, this week, last week now because it is Monday, is that its military is incapable of doing anything right now and is actually null and void. As in, it has so few vehicles that it cannot actively work as a combat unit or as a combat arms.
Would you acknowledge that some of that could be caused by the fact that we've been sending, NATO nations have been sending the little equipment they have to Ukraine?
No. You know why?
Okay. Would you also?
You know why?
Would you?
Hold on.
Would you also argue though? Would you argue that because Germany's underprepared for war, that Russia can handle NATO in a war even without United States involvement? Would you argue that?
The answer is twofold. It is not just Germany. For the last 4 decades, Europe has abandoned its GDP requirement of 2% in favor of welfare programs as it mothballs its fucking armies to being where you see it today, where Germany was before Ukraine started, the Ukraine war fully kicked off in 2022. Germany was passing around its Panzer, whatever the fuck, 2000 artillery systems between units. It didn't have enough for each unit to be fielded. They didn't have enough tanks for each unit. They were sharing fucking equipment between units. It is not just Ukraine. It is all the countries in NATO, besides the United States and some of the Baltic countries, actually having the required resources to be effective.
So how does that argument in any way, shape, or form prove that NATO's ineffective at its job when Russia's still struggling to defeat Ukraine itself? Not understanding.
Because 2 days after the invasion started, Germany, which is commanded by a fucking major general, literally just a 2-star, went up and right before the NATO summit happened and said, hey, we're combat ineffective. Literally, we don't even have a division we can put in the field. Have a good day. Like, that's not what we need to be hearing from people that are our allies. That's a joke.
So arguing that NATO was underprepared is one thing. Arguing that NATO was ineffective is another thing. It's very obvious.
If you're underprepared to where you can't even serve the purpose of your organization, you are ineffective.
Hold up, if I may. I do want to get Tyler in here before he has to go, but again, I guess I'm struggling to understand the point, right? I understand.
I get what he's saying.
Say.
I mean, like when Russia can't even.
I get what you're saying. But see, okay, so you guys are saying the ineffectiveness of NATO is measured because some of the smaller countries that aren't
Most
living
of
up to
them.
their end of the bargain. Most of them. I would argue that that shows the overall effectiveness of NATO with the United States at the helm,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of goes back to my original point: is we need
Yep.
to either make NATO have more teeth or completely get rid of it and just make it a pact.
Well,
Yeah.
that wasn't entirely my point here. My point here is that like the teeth of NATO, as I was talking to you about this earlier, Tyler, is the Article 5, right? And the fact that Russia, China, and none of these aggressor nations will fucking even dare,
Well,
even with
Yeah.
Germany not having enough, even with their 2-star general being a fuck up, right? Even with them not having enough panzers, they don't even dare. They would never dare, right?
Yeah.
Shows
I
that
no longer
the
believe that.
NATO still has
I-
purpose and still
I mean,
has teeth and
yeah.
still fulfills the duty that it has, which at the end of the day is to protect the member states from foreign aggression.
I agree. That was just a
That's
precursor
it.
to my
Yeah.
argument. The actual
know.
argument is more an economic one that I'm about to make here. So
But hold on, before you make that economic thing, I want to say something because I think you're going to take up issue with it. I mean, so the when you talk about the teeth in Article 5 being the teeth, yes, it's the teeth, right? And in theory, it's a lot of teeth. But I also agree with what Tiberius just said, and I don't think that they necessarily wouldn't attack a NATO country more.
We've already read. Sorry.
Yeah,
I've been chomping at the bit for fucking an hour and a half. It's like we've read his mail. He planned on going after Poland or after the Baltics next. Like
Yes.
he was literally going to do it. The big thing that maybe I'll side with Rashid is that they are doing so underly well in Ukraine that they maybe back off of that original plan. But yeah, they were literally going to go into a full blown knockout drag out fight with NATO. Like, we don't respect our lines. Whenever we say we're gonna do anything, we just fucking let them do it. We let them invade Georgia. We let them invade we let them support the Armenians. We let them get into Ukraine like 3 times now. Like, there's a point where the Russians just don't respect us to actually show up to the fight, which is a whole other conversation to itself.
that's the point I was trying to get at actually originally. We were trying to normalize. I don't see anything wrong with Germany trying to normalize trade with Russia. That's how you bring them into the circle of nations. I don't see anything wrong with bringing them into the G7. I don't see anything wrong with a post-Soviet Russia trying to integrate them into modern society and civilize them in that way. I think the effort is definitely good. It didn't work out in our way. And yes, NATO is effective, and that's why it acts as a subsidy for these other nations to just get rid of their military. Why do we need it? We got NATO. That U.S. is taking care of us. I don't like it, but that's the realism was on the ground of how it was acting. It was a subsidy for them to get rid of their military.
My point is, yeah, I think we can all argue about how successful Russia was. If they kept their hybrid tactics up with the little green men and then, like, having the people subvert the system and doing that, I think they would have eventually got most, if not all, Ukraine if they kept that open for the next, like, 30 years. I guess Putin wanted to test and see how much we would actually to pack him, and I guess he's finding out his answer.
He's on the clock.
So
He's
he's on the sure. All right. I mean, and that's the whole thing. But I think that it's twofold. He wants to start his thing. If they'd kept that system up, they'd been more successful. We probably never would have intervened. Or arguably would have intervened too late. I don't know. But regardless, we do know that the Article 5, in theory, we're supposed to go defend ourselves with everybody immediately, right? And I don't think there's any reason to suspect that he wouldn't keep like expanding and eventually go after a NATO state he didn't think that we were fully committed to protecting. And like, can we argue? Like, do y'all want to risk really like, full frontal, we're all going now? And if we like let a country like Ukraine in just because on principle we think he won't do it, like, especially if y'all are saying he's on a clock.
I'll say this: if right, a NATO country successfully invokes Article 5, and America doesn't show up, that would be the end of NATO. That would be it.
Yeah.
That would be the end
If
of American
Taiwan-
power.
if Taiwan
That
is
would be-
invaded-
that would be just it, right? That'd be the ballgame.
If Taiwan gets invaded and we don't protect it, that's the end of NATO. I don't know why anybody.
We're not
has
even a
to
NATO
be
member, but
NATO.
yes. Like,
Yes.
the problem is we are getting to the point where we have consistently shown that we will not show up for any fight when we say this is our red line. That, yeah, like, we can't scoop from for another fight. I'm actually just more of the opinion, and I know this is a hot take, that if we don't win, if Ukraine does not win, we fight the Russians one way or another. It will be a knockdown, drag-out fight.
If we have to fight China, Russia gets involved. We have to fight Russia frontal, China gets involved.
I
Because
don't think it's a matter
Neither
of
one of them.
I'll
Neither one of
agree
them
with
wants
you.
to be the only one left.
I don't.
And they don't
agree
want to
with
be the boogeyman.
No, I
don't-
agree. Hold on. I agree with Artemis on this take, right? Like, if China gets involved, Russia gets involved, right? If Russia gets in a very real way, Taiwan is a red line that if we do not uphold, right? We have a tradition of we say it's part of China, but nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of deal. And we also tell Taiwan, no, we will protect you if they try anything, right? China has plans to invade Taiwan. It absolutely does. Part of its plans, the first thing they will do is strike at American bases near the area to prevent us from getting involved immediately. And they're banking on being able to accomplish it de facto, right? So having it done and then banking on American unwillingness to oust them from what they have already accomplished, even though they attacked our bases. However, what I will say is that I think that that would be the last mistake China ever makes. Is if they do that, I think it will be 9/11 times 1,000, right? Like,
It's
in
Pearl
our
Harbor too.
response, it just will not go well for
Oh.
them. I still believe that. I still believe that America, right, will band together if we are attacked directly. That we will band in that way, especially against China, right? Yeah, I have every
I got
full
2
confidence
minutes.
that we will respond appropriately.
I got 2 minutes and then I gotta get up out of here. I got a hard deadline, but I just want to say, in aspects of like Biden right now is hurting his political chances in the next election the longer this war in Israel goes on. The far left has hated almost everybody in the country, that like 16 or whatever percent that sides with Gaza here. All of them are potential Biden voters that are pissed at him for it. So the longer it goes on, the worse it is for his election chances, and he still keeps doubling down, at least in action. You got him talking out of both sides of his mouth on rhetoric. Absolutely. One day he's saying that Israel's going over the top, and the next day he's saying we fully endorse. Understandable, but the fact that he's standing by Israel now 4 months into the war, when George Bush stood by Israel, I want to say it was 2006 in Lebanon, they gave him like 38 days, and then the Bush administration wanted to withdraw support for Israel. 4 months from Joe Biden is huge, especially if you look at Obama's stance on Israel. He was very anti right wing Israel, anti Bibi Netanyahu. Biden's been great on this. And again, it's hurting his political side. So I really think Biden is projecting strength with his stances right now in both Israel and in Ukraine. And it really does bring me some sort of comfort, even though the guy's seen that it's inspiring China to hold back on Taiwan.
I also have to go. Wait, do you mind if I shout something out for tomorrow after your
Please
content?
go ahead. No, do your shout out, buddy. Biden, Gibbs, you have the floor, and we are going to wrap this up soon because I do have to. Go
Yeah, I'm leaving right as soon as I do this. Tomorrow, thank you, Wick, for having me. I love these. He's always fun. Can't wait to do more. Tomorrow I'm hosting a panel immediately after Wick's panel. It's going to be on. I don't host many panels, so this should be an interesting one. We got a lot of non-Twitch poll people in it, and Twitch poll people. It's going to be on the internet culture and streaming culture and modern business relationships and dating. It's going to be really interesting. What is the impact? It's going to be wild times. Thanks for letting me shout it out, Wick.
Of course. Peace out to Tyler and peace out to Gibbs. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Nice meeting everybody. Add me to your friend. I do. I
Good to
love
see you,
the
buddy.
game. Take her easy.
Bye-bye.
So, Rashad, got a question for you.
What's up?
Why do you think that if Trump is in power, that he wouldn't fund Ukraine?
Trump. It's not a matter of we don't know. We don't know what he would do.
know.
And the problem with Trump is that Trump seems to think that a momentary deal for peace is the solution when it's clearly not, right? Like it was listed, Russia invaded Chechnya, Georgia. They've shown time and time again that it's high time to finally put them down. I think that kicking the can down the road is not the right solution, and I think that Joe Biden's current strategy of draining Russia economically and militarily and removing their ability to dictate terms or even state, any sort of wild terms, I think that that's the current path that's best, and Trump seems to be really, really uncomfortable with even taking that path.
Okay, so do you know what threat over the phone Trump made to Putin when Trump was in office in regard to Ukraine?
I mean, what does it matter in the grand scheme of things?
Tell me. What was the
I
the
don't
threat?
know, but I don't know, but
He
it
would
doesn't really
nuke.
matter.
No. He would bomb Moscow if they invaded Ukraine.
Do you?
I mean, that's even worse. That's even worse than what I was just talking about.
It doesn't matter, but Russia only respects strength, right?
Yeah, but that's not.
And when did they invade? Hold on. Let me
There are
finish.
different ways to show strength besides bombing
Yes.
Moscow.
And then, so who was who was the first president to sell arms to Ukraine instead of pillows and blankets?
I'm assuming you're going to say Trump.
Yes, because he sold javelins.
That
to
so
Ukraine.
that invalidates Trump's dancing around a clear-cut solution to Ukraine. That completely invalidates Trump. His love for his basically love for Putin. His soft on Russia.
There was
his
never a
soft
soft on Russia.
I
I
mean,
don't know
this
what
is the
people
same
do.
guy that when he was confronted about his trust for Russian intelligence in comparison to U.S. intelligence, this is the guy that sat there and said,
Yeah,
"Well,
the
Putin told me X,
intelligence
Y, Z." So
agencies.
I think Putin's telling the
Hold on.
truth. Trump has been all over the place in terms of
the
his feelings
intelligence
toward Russia,
agencies
and that is
that-
my problem. My problem is that he's unpredictable and unreliable.
You're telling me that for some reason Trump didn't respect his own intelligence agencies who are running covert investigations behind his back to fabricate evidence about him working with the Russians, and for some reason he didn't like his own intelligence agencies. You're telling me that you seem to be an issue with that.
You get up in front of the entire world, right next to the leader of an adversarial nation, and you sit there and say that I trust what Vladimir Putin just told me in front of millions of people, in front of American citizens who can influence the future of this nation with their vote. You get up in front of all of them and you sit there and say, "Yeah, I think Putin would never lie to me." You think that's appropriate? I mean, it doesn't even matter if it is appropriate or not. The point being is that Trump, as it stands right now, has been really cagey about his solution to Ukraine, and I personally believe that Trump kicking the can down the road is not the right solution. And I think that Joe Biden, I'm assuming that's his solution. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you're assuming he's going to kick the can down the road when reality.
That's what he said, though.
Hold on, Artemis. What do you think Trump will do?
That's what I was about to bring up. I think what Trump is going to do is he's going to come over there. He's going to say, "Okay, look, let's make a deal. This deal is going to fail, but he's going to say, let's make a deal. You keep the Donbass or whatever, Crimea, but Ukraine, the rest of Ukraine, as it is Ukrainian sovereignty and will join immediately into NATO or whatever." Russia can't accept that deal. It's not going to accept that deal because
Ukraine can't even accept that deal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Ukraine won't accept the deal either, but they're going to frame it as if Russia won't. But because Russia needs Odessa, that's already a stated thing of Putin. He's not going to give it up because he wants to make Ukraine a landlocked country. So what is going to happen is Putin's going to say, "No, we want it all," and then Trump's going to go, "Okay, flood the country with weapons because you spited me. I could have made a deal. Fuck you. We're going to go full in."
I respect
Because
your
that's what he
confidence. I don't see it
That's
going
what he
that way.
always does. Though. That's how he always does his actions.
Yeah, but
That sounds
like
so
you
perfect of an outcome.
Yeah, you made the argument earlier. Like Trump was the first one to actually sell weapons to Ukraine, which is totally true, right? Javelins, MLAWs, a lot of stingers,
Which
a lot of
probably saved it from being overtaken in the first few days of the war.
Very possibly. Like the javelins were great. The other side of this is that what caused him to stop. Oh, that's right. He was pissed off at Zelensky because he wouldn't help investigate Hunter Biden.
Which we have a treaty for him was supposed to have happened. He was supposed to help him with that. There's a crime.
So who does he
treaty.
side with? What does he go back to supplying Ukrainian weapons, or does he say "fuck you, Zelensky, you didn't help me against my political opponents"?
Oh no, he's going to
continue.
He's going to continue to supply weapons because it's going to be in the best interest of the United States to decommission.
I don't think
Is
he gives
really
a flying
though?
fuck
With
for the
his
best
base
interest of the
becoming
United States.
with his base becoming increasingly anti-Ukraine support, is he actually going to do that?
Yes, he is.
Really?
I love the confidence. I really do. But
I think that sounds like a perfect scenario that discounts all of the shit he's done since he left office in terms of like not only his rhetoric, but not only his rhetoric, but the rhetoric of people surrounding him in his camp. I mean, that MAGA wing has spent the last 4 years being anti what's the word?
Ukraine,
like
Russian.
Anti-intervention.
So like I don't think that MAGA voters are going to be happy to hear Trump say, yeah, actually more money, more funding to Ukraine. I think that Republican political pundits have done an amazing job of spinning the narrative to make it seem like Russia's the victim. And it's going to be really, really hard for Trump to sit there and say, well, Putin wouldn't accept my deal, so...
Yes, all right. $2 from 𝕊𝖍𝖙 Johnson to say, we can all agree that Taiwan belongs to China. No, we can't, but thank you for $2.
China.
We can. The Republic of China.
Yes.
Some Chiang Kai-shek or whatever.
Chiang Kai-shek, yeah.
But anyway, gang, I hate to cut this short, but I do have things I need to do and prep for. Because, gang, you know what we have tomorrow? Tomorrow, we're going to have Short Fat Otaku and Brianna Wu we're just gonna horse around a little, right? Maybe
is
talk
that
about
Vosh
some of the
reference?
things that have been happening of late. We're gonna have some Starship Troopers discourse too, as well. I'm sure.
Ooh.
Rashad's a bug man.
Nah, I have nothing to
No,
do with anything in the States.
but it will be fun. So tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to talk about that. Then Wednesday, we're going to be talking about Biden and the Her report, right? The Her report came out. There's a lot to do with that, including Biden's mental acuity. We're going to have Lactoid on. We're going to have Adam Mockler on. We're going to have Hutch on. And hopefully we have a hidden guest that will be joining us for that as well, but they haven't said yes yet. If they say no, we have a backup, but we'll see how that goes. So tune in for that. And then Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern, Lav will be on, and we'll be having call-ins, so you can call in for that. But thank you all for being here. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to my callers. Again, I hate to cut this short, but I do have to go. So again, gang, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Wait, bye everyone. Oh wait, who are we rating in? Tiberius, are you streaming right now?
No, I didn't know if I was actually going to be able to get on here, so I didn't start.
Sorry. Let me see who is streaming right now on the Twitch world. Hold on. One moment, please.
Rashad, you sticking around?
I got a dip.
Are you
Let's-
sure? 'Cause I was gonna fight you, Rashad. I was gonna keep
Let's
going.
go to Admiral. Yeah, Admiral Gibbs. If he's still streaming, we'll go there. Hey, wait. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
I'm
Bye. Bye.
Oh, god damn it.
Yeah, he
Give it a
left.
minute. Give it a minute.
Yeah, you had 4